Hey guys, tonight we are going to stand on the edge of the world's last true mystery. Forget space. We're on a small boat, bobbing in the absolute center of the Pacific Ocean. It's 3 a.m. There's no moon. Look over the rail. All you see is black. All you hear is the gentle lapping of water against the hull. All you feel is the cold, damp, salt air. And beneath your feet, beneath this thin plank of fiberglass, is 5 miles of water. 5 miles of cold, crushing, absolute darkness. You're floating on what we call the photic zone. It's the sunlight zone, the paper-thin layer of the ocean that light can actually touch, and it only goes down about 200 meters, or 660 feet. This is the entire ocean of our imagination. It's where you find the dolphins, the colorful coral, the great white sharks, the plankton blooms. It's the tiny fraction of the ocean that we see in documentaries, the part that runs on sunlight and photosynthesis. But every single night, from below, the next layer, the twilight zone, sends up its ambassadors. In the single greatest migration on Earth, trillions of creatures, lanternfish, squid, copepods, rise from the deep to feed in this sunlit layer, all under the cover of darkness. Then, as dawn approaches, they sink back down into the black. So what are they hiding from? What kind of world exists below that 200-meter veil? A world that makes up over 90% of Earth's living space. What rules govern a place with no light, no warmth, and a pressure that can crush a submarine like a soda can? Thanks to unmanned robotics and a new generation of deep-sea cameras, tonight we will venture into these depths together. We're going to sink past the world we know and into the world we were never meant to see. Frankly, if you fell overboard right now, the cold and the dark would be the last things you'd worry about. It's the pressure change you wouldn't even have time to notice as you sank. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. That small click sends a big signal to the algorithm. That long-form, serious, educational content still matters. And to me, it's an incredibly meaningful show of support. Thank you so much for helping keep this channel going strong. It always fascinates me to see where you're all tuning in from. Let me know in the comments where you are in the world and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. That 200-meter line isn't just a number. It's a border. Above it is the world of sight, of speed, of energy from the sun. It's a world ruled by photosynthesis, a concept we've understood since Jan Ingenhousz first played with mint leaves in a jar in the 1770s. This thin layer is where all the primary production happens, the base of the entire oceanic food web. But as you begin to sink, as our imaginary submersible closes its hatch and begins its descent, you watch the light change. It fades from bright tropical white to a deep royal blue. Then the blue gets deeper, dimmer. Past 150 meters, it's a weak, ghostly twilight. And then, at 200 meters, it clicks off. It's gone. You are now in the twilight zone, the mesopelagic. It stretches from 200 meters down to 1,000 meters, or 3,300 feet. The last photons of sunlight are extinguished here, leaving nothing but an inky, cold blackness. This is the zone that participates in that nightly commute, the diel vertical migration. This migration is so vast, so dense with life, that when sonar was first being perfected during World War II, operators were completely baffled. Every single night, their sonar screens would show a false bottom rising from the depths. They called it the deep scattering layer. They thought it was a new, secret tactic by enemy submarines. It wasn't. It was life. A living wall of trillions of creatures, so thick it reflected their sound waves. Scientists still debate why so many creatures expend the massive energy it takes to make this journey every single day. The leading theory is a simple trade-off. You commute up to the dangerous but food-rich buffet of the surface, and then you retreat to the cold, dark, safe depths to hide, digest, and avoid being seen by the predators of the photic zone. But as you sink past them, past 500 meters, past 800, you leave them behind too. You are sinking below that migrating layer. You look up, and there is no surface to see. There is no hint of blue. There is only black. You check your depth gauge, 1,000 meters. You have just crossed the second border. The light is gone. The migration is above you. You are now officially in the true deep sea. You have just entered the bathyal zone, the midnight zone. It will continue from this point, 1,000 meters, all the way down to 4,000 meters, about 2.5 miles. The temperature here is a stable, crushing 4 degrees Celsius, 39 degrees Fahrenheit, just a few degrees above freezing, and it will not change for the rest of our journey. The silence is no longer just a lack of sound. It's a presence. It feels heavy, absolute. But the true ruler of this kingdom, the invisible, ever-present God of this world, isn't a creature. It's the pressure. We're so used to our comfortable 14.7 pounds per square inch, at sea level, the weight of the atmosphere, that we don't even feel it. We evolved to be perfectly in balance with it. Here, at 1,000 meters, the weight of the water above you is exerting over 1,500 psi. By the time you reach the bottom of this zone, it will be nearly 6,000 psi. It's a number so large it's almost meaningless, so let's use an analogy. Take your thumbnail. Imagine a concert grand piano, weighing half a ton, balancing perfectly on that tiny 1-inch square. Now imagine that on every single inch of your body, all at once. This is why we can't go here. It's not about holding your breath. Our bodies are fundamentally air-based. We are full of air-filled cavities. Our lungs, our sinuses, our middle ears. At 1,500 pounds per square inch, those cavities would simply cease to exist. They would be crushed instantly, collapsing under the load. You would be compacted into a solid mass. Even if you were solid, the pressure would attack your very cells. The delicate folded structures of your proteins, the building blocks of your body, would be physically denatured or unraveled. You would literally fall apart on a molecular level. This sheer, unimaginable hostility is why, for most of human history, we assumed the deep sea was dead. In the 1840s, a prominent British naturalist named Edward Forbes was the leading voice on the subject. He had dredged for life down to about 550 meters, and he noticed that the further down he went, the less life he found. He drew a logical, sensible line. He proposed the azoic hypothesis, the lifeless hypothesis, stating that below 550 meters, the conditions of pressure, darkness, and cold made life impossible. It was the scientific consensus for decades. It was completely logical, and it was completely wrong. Life is here. It's just playing by a completely different set of rules. So in this world of eternal darkness, crushing force, and near freezing cold, what could they possibly eat? The answer is, they eat the ghosts of the world above. Look out the window of our submersible. You see, snow. A constant, gentle, silent, and endless flurry of white particles drifting down from the blackness above. This is marine snow. It's not snow. It's the organic detritus from that busy, sunlit photic zone, hundreds of meters above you. It's a constant rain of dead plankton, fish scales, copepod skeletons, fecal matter, and dust. This is the entire economy of the deep sea, an economy built on starvation. The creatures here are detritivores. They are waste eaters. They have evolved to be incredibly, impossibly efficient. They have slow metabolisms, moving only when they must. They are often just mouths with bodies, designed to do nothing but wait, filter, and extract every last calorie from this nutrient-poor dust. It's a world built on leftovers, and every so often, the leftovers are not just snow. Every so often, the deep sea wins the lottery. Imagine a blue whale, 80 feet long, 150 tons, dying at the surface. That massive body begins to sink. It falls past the photic zone, past the twilight zone, and tumbles for hours through the blackness, finally landing on the abyssal plain with a silent, thunderous impact. For the creatures of the deep, this is a whale fall. It's the equivalent of 1,000,000 years' worth of marine snow arriving all at once. It's a jackpot, a feast that will create an entire unique ecosystem, a story we will return to. This is the bathyal zone, a world of waiting, of patience, a world of darkness, of crushing force, and of an economy built on starvation, where the only hope for a feast is a snowflake of plankton or the colossal sunken corpse of a giant. But let's pause our descent for a moment. That feeling you get, just imagining this world, that slight tightness in your chest, the quickening pulse, the very real sense of unease. Why is that? You are perfectly safe in your home, on dry land, yet the idea of this place is profoundly unsettling. This isn't just a simple fear of drowning. It has a name, or at least a modern neologism given to it by the internet. Thalassophobia. It's the specific, and often overwhelming, fear of deep, dark, large bodies of water. It's the fear of not knowing what is beneath you. It's the feeling you get when you swim out over a reef, and the sandy bottom suddenly drops away into a dark blue abyss. It's one of the most common phobias, and psychologists still debate whether this fear is truly innate or culturally learned. But the evidence for an innate, evolutionary root is very strong. Think about us, Homo sapiens. We are savanna creatures. We evolved on the plains of Africa, standing upright to see over the tall grass. Our entire survival kit is based on two things: sight and land. We are visual predators. We spot threats from a distance. We process the world through light and color. We are masters of the horizontal. The deep ocean is the antithesis of every single thing that makes us human. It is not horizontal. It is vertical. There is no light to see by. There is no ground to stand on. There is no distance to perceive. It is an environment that renders our most dominant sense, our sight, completely and totally useless. It strips us of our evolutionary advantage and leaves us helpless, blind, and suspended. Our ancestors who waded into the water to fish or cross a river were always wary of what they couldn't see. The Plinian crocodiles of the Nile, the snapping turtles, the predators lurking just below the reflective surface. The individuals who had a healthy fear of that unseen world were the ones who didn't get pulled under. They were the ones who survived, who passed on their genes. We are the descendants of the cautious ape. That unease you feel is the echo of 1,000,000 years of survival, a genetic whisper telling you, get back on land. You do not belong here. But there's another layer to it, a layer that's less about physical survival and more about the landscape of our own minds. The ocean has always been our favorite metaphor for the vast, the uncontrollable, the infinite. And in psychology, it found its most powerful role as a mirror for the human subconscious. The 20th century psychologist Carl Jung, a student of Freud, proposed the idea of a collective unconscious, a shared, inherited set of primal memories and symbols that all humans possess. For Jung, the ocean was the ultimate symbol for this. He envisioned the human mind like a small island. Your consciousness is the tiny sunlit village on the shore. The personal unconscious is the beach and the shallows, the things you've forgotten but could remember. But the deep ocean, that was the collective unconscious. The vast, dark, unexplored territory filled with primal archetypes, ancient fears, and powerful non-human energies. Jung believed that when we dream of the ocean, or when we feel that pull of thalassophobia, we are really just standing at the edge of our own internal, uncharted abyss. We aren't just afraid of what's in the water, we're afraid of what it represents. We are afraid of the deep inside ourselves. This is exactly why the 1920s horror writer H.P. Lovecraft remains so powerful. Lovecraft's genius was in understanding this primal fear. His brand of cosmic horror wasn't about ghosts or vampires, it was about the scale of the unknown and our own utter insignificance. And where did his most famous Great Old One come from? Not from space. Cthulhu, his most iconic entity, was a vaguely anthropoid, pulpy, scaly, prodigious being that lay dreaming in the sunken non-Euclidean city of R'lyeh at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. Lovecraft knew that the deep sea is the most perfectly alien environment on our own planet. The creatures that actually live there, like the ones we are about to meet, are so far removed from our sunlit terrestrial world that they are, for all intents and purposes, aliens. They are the monsters that cosmic horror primed us for. They are the living embodiment of the unknown, and they confirm our deepest, most primal suspicion, that we are not the masters of this planet. We are just the masters of the dry, sunlit parts. That primal fear, that Lovecraftian dread of the unknown deep, wasn't just a 20th century literary device. It was, for most of human history, our only map of the deep sea. Before science, that vast, blue, two-dimensional void on our maps was a terrifying blank space. And as a species, we have always been psychologically incapable of leaving a blank space empty. We fill the void. We fill it with our fears, our hopes, and most of all, we fill it with monsters. We needed to believe something was down there, because the alternative, that it was just empty, cold, and dead, was somehow even more terrifying. This need gave birth to the first and most enduring maritime legends. You can find them in our oldest texts. The Old Testament, in the book of Job, describes the Leviathan, a primordial fire-breathing sea serpent so powerful that it represents the untamable chaos of creation. This wasn't just a big fish. It was a divine creature, a symbol of an ocean that was actively hostile to humanity and obedient only to God. this mythic blueprint, the great sea serpent, became the default monster for millennia. But the most scientific of these myths, the one that truly captured the imagination, came from the Norse. They had a monster called the Kraken. It was first described in the 13th century saga of Örvar Odder, but it was the 18th century Norwegian bishop Erik Pontoppidan who really gave it a biological profile. He described it not as a serpent, but as a creature round, flat, and full of arms, the largest and most surprising of all animal creation. He claimed it was the size of a floating island, and that when it submerged, it created a whirlpool so vast it could sink the largest warships. This sounds like pure fantasy, but historians and biologists are now almost certain that the Kraken was something very real. It was the result of northern sailors encountering the giant squid. They would find its massive, rotting corpse floating on the surface. Or even more terrifyingly, they would witness it in a life-or-death battle with its only predator, the sperm whale. They were just reporting what they saw, and what they saw was a monster. The myth was just an attempt to process a very real, very alien creature. This blurring of the line between fact and mythology was the standard for centuries. The most famous naturalist of the ancient world, Pliny the Elder, wrote the definitive encyclopedia of his time, Naturalis Historia, Natural History, in 77 AD. It's a staggering work of scholarship, and it's also completely, fantastically wrong much of the time. Alongside meticulous descriptions of elephants and bees, Pliny calmly lists the existence of nereids, mermaids, describing them as having human-like bodies but covered in scales. He even cites an official report from an officer in Gaul who claimed a seaman was seen in the ocean. For Pliny, the scientific debate wasn't if they existed, but just what they looked like. This tradition continued right into the Renaissance, creating one of the weirdest chapters in zoology, the sea monk and the sea bishop. In the 1500s, natural history books were filled with detailed illustrations of these two creatures. The sea monk was a fish that looked exactly like a Catholic monk, complete with a tonsured, shaved head and robes. The sea bishop was a fish that looked, well, like a bishop, with a pointed mitre for a head. This sounds like a joke, but 16th century scholars took it very seriously. They argued over their nature. The French naturalist Pierre Bellon, who was a real scientist, even declared the sea monk a hoax. But his contemporary, Guillaume Rondelet, insisted it was real and included it in his definitive text on marine life. What were they seeing? The sea monk was almost certainly a squid, whose body shape and large fin vaguely resembled a hood. The sea bishop, probably a Jenny Hanover, a ray or a skate that had been carved, dried, and distorted by a sailor to look like a monster, which they would then sell to gullible landlubbers as a basilisk or a dragon. This is where the famous phrase, "Here be dragons," comes from. Now we have to deconstruct this a little. That exact phrase has only been found on one or two minor globes, like the 16th century Hunt Lennox globe. It wasn't the common warning sign we think it was, but the spirit of the phrase was everywhere. Maps were covered in sea serpents, in krakens, in giant tusked whales swallowing ships whole. These weren't just decorations. They were a genuine failure of knowledge, a visualization of that thalassophobia. They were the cartographic equivalent of a shrug, a warning to sailors that said, "We just don't know what's out here, but it's probably bad. We've been suspended in this world of myth for a long time." But now we're going to jump forward, from the 16th century past the age of sail, and land in the 19th century, the age of steam, steel, and the birth of modern science. The sea monk and sea bishop have been dismissed as sailor's fancy. The scientific community is now governed by logic and testable hypotheses, and the dominant logical and accepted hypothesis is still Edward Forbes' azoic hypothesis, the firm belief that no life, none, could possibly exist below 550 meters. The pressure was too high, the dark too complete, the cold too extreme. The deep ocean, science had decided, was a dead, sterile void. But a few things were happening that started to poke holes in this theory. When telegraph companies began laying the first transatlantic cables in the 1850s and 60s, they ran into problems. When they pulled a damaged cable up from a depth of over a mile, they found it encrusted with life. Small corals, anemones, and other creatures were stuck to it. This was a problem for the azoic theory. It was evidence, but it was circumstantial. Science needed a definitive, grand, and unassailable mission to settle the question for good. That mission was the Challenger expedition. In 1872, a British Royal Navy warship, the HMS Challenger, was completely stripped of its guns and refitted as the world's first dedicated oceanographic research vessel. Its mission, funded by the Royal Society, was simple in scope and epic in scale: to sail around the world for 4 years, and for the first time to systematically and scientifically map the deep ocean. They were to measure its depth, chart its currents, take its temperature, and, most importantly, find out what, if anything, lived down there. The expedition, led by Chief Scientist Charles Wyville Thomson, was the Apollo program of its day. It was a statement of national pride and scientific ambition, and its primary tool was not a camera or a submersible. It was a dredge. This was essentially a heavy-duty iron rake and a strong net that was spooled out on miles of Italian hemp rope, dragged along the bottom of the ocean for a few hours, and then painstakingly winched back to the surface, a process that could take almost an entire day. On February 14th, 1875, the Challenger was in the Western Pacific, in a remote area between Guam and Palau. They spooled out the dredge line, and they kept spooling and spooling. They hit bottom at a depth they could scarcely believe: 4,475 fathoms, or over 8,184 meters, more than 26,000 feet. They had just found the deepest part of the ocean. We now call it the Mariana Trench, and its deepest point, just south of where they were, is named the Challenger Deep, in their honor. But the real discovery was what happened when they finally hauled that dredge back up to the deck. It was full. It was overflowing with mud, with strange, pale creatures, with fish that had no eyes, with shrimp and sea lilies. It was conclusive, undeniable proof. Forbes' azoic theory was dead. Life was everywhere. It existed in the total blackness, under 4 tons of pressure per square inch. This expedition completely rewrote the textbooks. It was the single most important voyage in the history of oceanography. Over 4 years, they discovered 4,717 new species of animals and plants. And they found the first tantalizing clues that the life down there wasn't just like life on the surface, only deeper. It was following a different set of rules. In the dredge, they pulled up giant isopods. These creatures looked exactly like the little roly-polies, or woodlice, you find under a rotten log in your garden. except they were the size of a football. This was the first scientific evidence of what we now call deep-sea gigantism. The Challenger hadn't just proven that life existed in the deep. It had proven that the deep was a funhouse mirror, a place that twisted and warped the very nature of biology, creating giants in the dark. They had, in effect, defined the battlefield for the next 150 years of exploration. The Challenger expedition was a revolution. It had proven the deep was inhabited. But it also revealed a massive, frustrating new problem. That dredge was a brutal, clumsy tool. It was like trying to understand life in downtown Manhattan by dragging a mile-wide net through it from a helicopter. You'd catch a few yellow cabs, a dozen pigeons, and maybe a hot dog vendor's umbrella. You'd know things lived there, but you would have no idea what a city was. You wouldn't understand the context. You wouldn't see the skyscrapers, the traffic lights, the subways, or the way people actually lived. The dredge destroyed the very world it was sampling. The creatures it brought up were dead, pale, and often blown up by the rapid pressure change, their swim bladders grotesquely inverted. The delicate, gelatinous creatures, the real citizens of the deep, were simply torn to shreds by the net. The scientists of the early 20th century were still blind. They were cataloguing corpses. They needed eyes. This is where two remarkable and completely opposite Americans enter the story: William Beebe and Otis Barton. Beebe was the scientist. He was a world-famous, charismatic, and poetic naturalist, already renowned for his jungle explorations. Barton was the engineer. He was a wealthy, stubborn, and abrasive adventurer who had a singular obsession: building a sphere to conquer the deep. They were the perfect dysfunctional partnership. Beebe wanted to see the deep. Barton wanted to build the machine to get him there. In the 1930s, working off Non-Such Island in Bermuda, they unveiled their invention. It was called the bathysphere, and it was, by modern standards, a terrifyingly primitive contraption. It was essentially a hollow steel ball, just under 5 feet wide and 4,700 pounds, with two tiny 3-inch thick windows made of fused quartz, the strongest transparent material then available. This was not a submarine. It had no engine, no thrusters. It was, quite literally, a cannonball with windows. It was attached to a single 7/8 inch thick steel cable, which was spooled off a giant winch on their barge, the Ready. Inside, Beebe and Barton were crammed in, shoulder to shoulder, breathing recycled air from oxygen tanks, with trays of soda lime to absorb their CO2. They had one telephone line, woven into the cable, as their only link to the surface. The danger was almost absolute. If the cable snapped, they would be lost forever, vanishing into the abyss. If a window cracked, the 1,500 psi pressure would force a jet of water into the sphere with the force of a high-caliber bullet, killing them instantly. If the seal on the 400-pound hatch failed, well, Beebe himself calculated that a pinhole leak at 800 meters would turn them into a pulpy mass in less than a second. This is what they climbed into, willingly, in 1934. They began their descent. They sank past the Challenger's azoic line. They sank past 200 meters, watching the blue light fade. They sank past 500 meters into the cold, crushing black. They kept going. They stopped their descent at 800 meters, 2,600 feet, a record-breaking depth. They were the first human beings in all of history to enter the midnight zone and look out the window. And what they saw changed everything. Beebe peering through his quartz port, became a poet. He wasn't a man of science in that moment. He was a man of wonder. He described a world of absolute, uniform, impenetrable blackness. And then, lights. Not a uniform glow, but constellations. He described serpents of light that twisted past the window. He saw fish with glowing teeth and luminous portholes running down their sides. He described galaxies of tiny flashing points that would erupt in a veritable shower of sparks when a larger shadow passed through them. He was the first human to ever witness bioluminescence in its natural deep-sea habitat. He was seeing the deep scattering layer that sonar would later find, but he was seeing it as the living, glittering city it was. He described creatures that no net had ever caught, things that could not be caught. He saw a fish, which was a pale grey, dotted with brilliant purple lights. He saw a 3-inch creature of unknown origin, with a long, tissue-like projection. When he returned to the surface and published his findings, many in the scientific community ridiculed him. They called his descriptions poetic, fantastical, unreliable. They were used to the grey, dead sludge from the Challenger's dredge. They accused him of hallucinating in the dark. The scholarly debate became, was Beebe a scientist or a showman? He was vindicated, of course. We now know that everything Beebe described was real. Those serpents of light were siphonophores, the constellations were lanternfish, the sparks were copepods. He had seen the impossible. He had proven that the deep wasn't just inhabited. It was a bustling, glittering metropolis of light, a place far stranger and more beautiful than any myth. William Beebe had opened the door. He had shown us the city of light. But he was, quite literally, at the end of his rope. The bathysphere was a masterpiece of brute force engineering, but it had a fundamental limit. It was an elevator, not an explorer. Beebe was just a passive observer, dangling in the dark, unable to move, unable to explore. To truly conquer the deep, humanity had to cut the cord. The man who would do this was a Swiss physicist named Auguste Piccard. Piccard was a man obsessed with altitude, not depth. He was a brilliant inventor who had already smashed the world record for ballooning, becoming the first man to fly a balloon into the stratosphere to study cosmic rays. For Piccard, the engineering problems of the stratosphere and the deep ocean were identical. In the sky, you needed a pressurized cabin to keep the outside, the vacuum, out. In the ocean, you needed a pressurized cabin to keep the outside, the pressure, out. He simply inverted his balloon design. His invention was the bathyscaphe, which literally means deep boat. It was a revolutionary new design, essentially an underwater blimp. It consisted of 2 main parts. First, there was a tiny, heavy, spherical crew cabin, just like Beebe's, but built to withstand far greater pressure. This sphere was then bolted to the bottom of a massive, thin-skinned float tank. But what do you fill the float with? Not air. Air would be crushed instantly by the pressure. You needed a liquid that was lighter than water, but incompressible. Piccard's genius solution? Gasoline. The Trieste was essentially a steel ball hanging under a 50-foot-long gas tank filled with 22,000 gallons of aviation fuel. To sink, it released gasoline, making it heavier, and took on water. To rise, it simply dropped its ballast. Tons of iron pellets held in place by electromagnets. If the power failed, the magnets would die, the ballast would drop automatically, and it would float safely to the surface. It was redundant, brilliant, and elegant. In 1958, the US Navy bought this futuristic machine and gave it one epic Cold War-era mission, codenamed Project Nekton. The goal: to take 2 men to the absolute, undisputed bottom of the world, the Challenger Deep in the Mariana Trench, a place the Challenger expedition had measured, but no one had ever seen. A place 7 miles down. On January 23, 1960, a young Navy lieutenant named Don Walsh and Picard's own son, Jacques Picard, crawled into the tiny, freezing-cold steel sphere. They were sealed in. The Trieste began its long descent. It took them 4 hours and 47 minutes to fall to the bottom. They were sinking through a marine snow so thick that Walsh later described it as like falling through clouds. They were totally alone, suspended in the black, the only 2 humans in history to attempt such a thing. Then, at 30,000 feet, still a mile above the bottom, a loud crack echoed through the sphere. The entire vessel shuddered. This was the moment that would haunt any engineer. They looked around, shining their flashlights, checking their gauges. They found the source. A small outer plexiglass window in the entry tunnel, a tube used to get into the sphere from the float, had cracked under the immense pressure. This is the point where any sane person would abort the mission. They were inside a machine that was visibly breaking, but that window wasn't part of the main pressure-bearing sphere. They were still 10,000 feet from their goal. They looked at each other. They checked the gauges again. They kept going. Finally, after nearly 5 hours, a cloud of diatomaceous ooze billowed up past the window. They had touched down. They were at the bottom of the world. The depth gauge read 35,814 feet. The pressure outside was over 16,000 pierres, the weight of a large truck on every square inch of their sphere. They turned on the spotlight, and in that tiny, solitary cone of light, in a place 7 miles deep where science insisted no complex life could exist, they saw a fish. Picard described it as a flat fish, like a sole or a flounder, about a foot long, swimming calmly away from their landing spot. They also saw a small red shrimp. This was the ultimate proof, even more profound than BB's. It wasn't just microbes, it wasn't just tube worms. It was a vertebrate. A complex animal with a spine and a circulatory system had evolved to withstand the single most extreme point of pressure on our planet. Or had it? This observation remains one of the most contentious in the history of oceanography. Marine biologists still argue, to this day, that what Picard saw couldn't have been a flat fish, that the cellular biology just doesn't work that deep. The scholarly debate is that he actually saw a sea cucumber, or a holothurian, which can look like a flat fish and are known to live at those depths. But Walsh and Pickard, Dupin, the only 2 eyewitnesses, went to their graves insisting they saw a fish. Either way, the message was the same. The Challenger was right. BB was right. The deep was not dead. It was alive. All of it. We're at the bottom of the world, in a place of eternal blackness. And yet the only 2 eyewitnesses in history, Walsh and Pickard, saw a fish. And before them, William Beebe, dangling in his bathysphere, was ridiculed for describing a city of light. It's time we vindicate Beebe. He wasn't a poet, or at least he wasn't just a poet. He was the first scientist to accurately report on the single most dominant feature of deep-sea life, bioluminescence. What Beebe saw, that veritable shower of sparks and serpents of light, is the language of the deep. In a world with absolutely zero sunlight, life did not give up on light. It simply learned to make its own. It's estimated that somewhere between 80% and 90% of all creatures living below the twilight zone are capable of producing their own light in some way. It's not the exception. It's the rule. So how do they do it? It's not magic. It's a beautifully efficient chemical reaction. The creature possesses a molecule called luciferin, from the Latin lucifer, or light bearer, and an enzyme called luciferase. When the creature decides to turn on the light, it mixes these two, and in the presence of oxygen, the luciferin is oxidized. The result is a photon of light. The most amazing part of this is its efficiency. We as a species are terrible at making light. Think of an old incandescent light bulb, a technology that dominated the 20th century. That bulb is a heat bulb that just happens to give off a little light. About 90% of the energy it consumes is wasted as pure, useless heat. This deep-sea reaction, on the other hand, is cold light. Nearly 100% of the energy in the reaction is converted directly into light. There is almost no heat. In a starvation economy like the deep sea, you cannot afford to waste energy on heat. This is biology at its most efficient, a chemical trick that evolved independently over 40 different times in the history of life. But why do it? Wasting any energy on a light show in a world of starvation seems foolish, unless it gives you a profound life-or-death advantage. The purposes for this light are as varied as the creatures themselves, but biologists have, for our convenience, boiled them down to a few key strategies. First, and most famous, the lure. This is the classic strategy of the anglerfish. She, and it's always a she, the male is a tiny parasitic non-entity, is a sit-and-wait predator. She's a floating, all-mouth, low-energy blob. De-angling from her head is a modified dorsal spine called an elysium, and on its tip is a glowing, fleshy esker, or lure. This esker is packed with symbiotic, bioluminescent bacteria. The anglerfish just sits in the black, a living, breathing fishing rod, waving that irresistible glowing worm back and forth. A small fish, seeing the only light it's seen in months, swims in to investigate, and the angler's city block-sized mouth inhales it in a fraction of a second. Second, location. Or, to be more blunt, mating. In a world that is three-dimensional, pitch black, and larger than all the continents combined, how do you find a date? You can't just go to the bar. You have to advertise. Many species of fish, shrimp, and squid have photophores, light-producing organs, arranged in unique patterns on their bodies, like a 747's windows at night. They will flash a specific sequence, a bioluminescent pickup line, that says, "I am a male of this species, and I am over here." Scientists still debate whether some of these complex light patterns are for mating or for territorial warnings, like a "get off my lawn" flash. Third, and perhaps the strangest, liability. This is the burglar alarm hypothesis. Imagine you're a small, tasty krill. A slightly larger but still small squid grabs you. You are about to be eaten. So what do? You scream. But you can't scream with sound. You scream with light. You unleash the brightest, most obnoxious flash of light you possibly can. Why? You aren't trying to scare the squid. You are betraying the squid. You are, in effect, shouting to the entire dark neighborhood, "Hey! Over here! A squid is eating me!" in the hopes of attracting a much larger predator, say a lanternfish, to come and investigate. The bigger predator swoops in to eat the squid, and in the confusion, the squid lets you go. It's a get-out-of-jail-free card, powered by light. Finally, there's the most sci-fi use of all, cloaking. This is counter-illumination. Think about the Twilight Zone. Predators down here don't just look around, they look up, scanning for the silhouettes of prey against that faint, ghostly blue light from the surface. So, if you're a hatchetfish living in this zone, you have a problem. Your body blocks the light. You are a perfect, hatchet-shaped target. Your solution? You have photophores all over your belly, and you have light sensors on your back. Your body senses the exact intensity and color of the blue light filtering down from above, and it perfectly matches that light with the glowing photophores on your underside. You are erasing your own shadow. You are a B-2 bomber of the deep, a creature that has evolved active biological light-based camouflage. Lures, lasers, burglar alarms, and cloaking devices. This isn't science fiction. This is just Tuesday in the deep sea. This is the world that BB saw. This world of pressure, darkness, and bioluminescent language doesn't just create new behaviors. It rewrites the fundamental rules of biology. Down here, the normal terrestrial patterns of life, growth, and death are warped into something alien. The deep sea creates two kinds of monsters: monsters of scale and monsters of time. First, let's talk about scale. You remember the Challenger expedition pulling up those giant isopods, the football-sized roly-polies? This is the most famous example of deep-sea gigantism. It's a phenomenon where certain groups of animals, like isopods, sea spiders, and squid, which are small in the shallows, achieve terrifyingly huge proportions in the deep. The giant squid, at 40+ feet, is the poster child. So why? Why does the deep sea create giants? This remains one of the most active and open scholarly debates in marine biology. There are two main competing theories. The first, and most popular, is Kleber's law, or the metabolic theory. It's all about the cold. The water down here is near freezing, which forces a creature's metabolism to slow down to a crawl. On the surface, an animal grows fast and dies young. In the deep, its internal clock is so slow that it never stops growing. It has a vastly extended lifespan, allowing it to just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger until it reaches a colossal size. The second theory is about resources. It argues that in a starvation world like the deep sea, being big is an advantage. If you only get to eat a whale fall once every 5 years, or a marine snow flurry once a month, you need a massive, low-energy body to survive the long fasts between meals. A big body is a better, more efficient storage tank for calories. And then there's the third, more controversial fringe idea: the pressure itself. Some biologists have argued that the extreme pressure somehow influences cell size and structure, but the how remains a mystery. The truth is, we don't know for sure. It's likely a combination of all these factors: a cold, high-pressure, low-food world that favors a big, slow life strategy over a fast, small one. But gigantism is only half the story. The other monster created by this big, slow strategy is one of time. Let's meet the Greenland shark. This is not a fast predator like the great white. It is an ancient, hulking, slow-motion phantom that haunts the deep, cold waters of the Arctic and North Atlantic, from 2,000 meters down. It's a massive creature, growing up to 20 feet long, but it moves at a sluggish 0.76 miles per hour. It is, for all intents and purposes, biologically blind. Its eyes are almost always covered in a unique, bioluminescent copepod, a tiny crustacean that latches on as a parasite dangling from its cornea. For centuries, no one knew how long they lived. But they were clearly old. In 2016, a team of Danish scientists finally solved the mystery with a brilliant and slightly gruesome technique. The lens of a vertebrate's eye is a unique piece of tissue. It's formed in the womb, and it never changes. Its core is made of proteins that are as old as the animal itself. These proteins contain a timestamp of the carbon in the ocean when the shark was born. The scientists took eye lenses from 28 different female Greenland sharks, caught as accidental bycatch. They used radiocarbon dating on that core tissue, the same technique archaeologists use to date Egyptian mummies. What they found was staggering. The youngest shark they tested was 50 years old. The average age was 272 years old. And the largest shark, a 16-footer, was estimated to be at least 392 years old, with a potential margin of error that could put it at over 500. Think about that. A creature, alive today, that was born in the early 1600s, before Isaac Newton discovered gravity, before the Sun King Louis XIV built the Palace of Versailles. A shark that was a juvenile when the American Revolution was fought. This animal, this living time capsule, is the longest living vertebrate on the planet by centuries. And the most mind-bending fact of all, the scientists also discovered that the females of this species don't even reach sexual maturity, they're not even teenagers, until they are about 150 years old. This is the deep-sea strategy. It is life played on geological time. It is a world where growth is measured in decades, childhood lasts a century, and life can span half a millennium. The Greenland shark survives by existing in slow motion, a living relic of a bygone era. But there are other kinds of survivors in the deep. Not just creatures that live a long time, but creatures that are, themselves, leftovers from a different world. Now, we are going to meet the ultimate living fossil, a creature so strange that when it was first discovered, scientists literally did not know what it was. In 1903, the German biologist Carl Chun was on the Valdivia expedition, a major scientific voyage meant to rival the Challenger. From the deep waters of the South Atlantic, he pulled up a small black thing. It was about a foot long, with huge pale blue eyes, a gelatinous black body, and 8 long webbed arms. He named it Vampiroteuthis infernalis, the vampire squid from hell. It's one of the most metal and most misleading names in all of biology. Because when Chun and later scientists began to dissect it, the confusion started. It had 8 arms, like an octopus, but it also had 2 tiny, retractable, thread-like filaments that were neither arms nor tentacles, and it had the gladius, or pen, a stiff internal shell, like a squid. It was an evolutionary chimera. It wasn't a squid. It wasn't an octopus. It was something else. For decades, scientists were baffled, and the scholarly debate raged. Where, on the entire tree of life, did this thing fit? The answer, when it finally came from genetics, was astonishing. It is a phylogenetic relict. It is not an octopus. It is not a squid. It is the single, last surviving member of its very own ancient order, the Vampiromorphidae. It is an evolutionary dead end, that should have gone extinct millions of years ago. All of its cousins, all of its relatives, are gone. It is the biological equivalent of a T-Rex or a Triceratops finding one last tiny pocket of the planet to hide in undiscovered. So where is that pocket? How did this living fossil survive when its entire lineage was wiped out? It found the one place on Earth where nothing else wants to live. The vampire squid thrives in the oxygen minimum zone, or OMZ. The OMZ is a layer of the ocean, typically between 600 and 1,000 meters down, where, due to a quirk of circulation and bacterial decay, there is almost no dissolved oxygen. The water is anoxic or hypoxic. For 99% of air-breathing or water-breathing animals, this zone is a suffocating wall of death. Fast-moving predators like sharks or tuna can't even swim through it without asphyxiating. The vampire squid lives there. It spends its entire life in this hypoxic void. This, of course, presented a new mystery. How? Its metabolism is the lowest of any cephalopod, meaning it sips oxygen. But the real secret is in its blood. Human blood is iron-based, using hemoglobin to transport oxygen, which gives it that red color. The vampire squid's blood is copper-based. It uses a pigment called hemocyanin, which turns its blood blue when oxygenated. This pigment is vastly more efficient at grabbing and holding on to the few scattered oxygen molecules in the OMZ. It can literally pull oxygen from water that is almost 97% depleted. Because it lives in this safe zone, where no predators can go, it has completely lost all of its squid-like hunting abilities. It is not the vampire from hell. It is, as scientists discovered only in 2012, the garbage collector from the oxygen-free zone. It doesn't hunt. It's a detritivore. It just drifts. It unfurls those two unique hair-like filaments, which can be 8 times its body length, and just lets them hang in the water, waiting to catch marine snow. When a piece of detritus, a copepod skeleton, a fish scale, sticks to the filament, it reels it in, scrapes the food off with its webbed arms, and eats it. It is a passive, lazy, brilliant survivor. And because it's not a hunter, it has also lost its defenses. It doesn't have the ink sac of a squid, which would be a useless and energetically expensive smoke bomb in a world of total darkness. Instead, it has the most bizarre, unvampire-like defense on Earth. When a creature does stumble into it, say a deep-diving fish that can hold its breath, the vampire squid doesn't flee. It doesn't fight. It does this. It fires off a cloud of bioluminescent mucus, a sticky, glittering cloud of light bombs to distract the predator. And while the predator is blinded, the squid performs its masterpiece. It pulls its 8 webbed arms up over its body, flipping itself completely inside out, stretching the black, webbed cloak over its head until it becomes a pineapple of harmless, fleshy spines called cirri. It turns itself from a scary squid into a confusing, spiky ball of nothing. It's the ultimate, these aren't the droids you're looking for defense. It's a living fossil from a forgotten world, breathing unbreathable water, eating dust, and hiding by turning itself into a piece of fruit. The vampire squid is a ghost, a living fossil that survives by hiding in a world without oxygen. But our journey is not complete. We must go deeper. We must leave the bathyal zone, sink past the abyssal zone, and return to that final realm, the deepest 1% of the ocean, the trenches. We are going back to the Hadal zone. This is the world below 6,000 meters, from 3.7 to nearly 7 miles down. This is the domain of the Trieste and the Challenger Deep. This is a place of 16,000 psi. For decades after that 1960 dive, this realm remained a mystery. Yes, Walsh and Pickard had seen that disputed flat fish, but for most of the scientific community, the Hadal zone was considered a microbial world. The pressure was just too extreme. The physics of life itself, the very folding of proteins, should, by all rights, fail under such a load. We assumed this was a dead zone, populated only by the toughest bacteria. Then, in the 2010s, a new generation of unmanned submersibles and landers began to explore the trenches in earnest. These landers are incredible pieces of technology, designed to free fall for hours, land on the bottom, and sit, armed with bait, 4K cameras and spotlights, and just wait. What they saw in the absolute deepest part of the Mariana Trench, 7 miles down, was not a dead zone. It wasn't just a few microbes. When the bait was released, they showed up. Not one or two. Swarms. They are the Mariana Snailfish, and they are the single greatest paradox in all of biology. When you picture the deepest living fish on Earth, a creature that survives 16,000 psi, you picture a tank. You picture an armored, heavy-skulled battleship of a creature, built to withstand the crush. The Mariana snailfish is the absolute opposite. It's small, about the length of your hand. It has no scales. Its skin is a translucent, pale pink. Its body is gelatinous. It looks fragile. It looks like a piece of half-formed wet tissue paper. It is, without a doubt, the antithesis of a tough animal. And it is the undisputed king of the deepest, most violent, highest pressure environment on our planet. This is the central mystery of the Hadal zone. How can a creature that looks like it would fall apart in your hand survive a pressure that would pretzel a nuclear submarine? For years, this baffled biologists. And the answer, when it was finally discovered, is so elegant, it's almost poetic. The fish isn't fighting the pressure. It's using it. The secret is a chemical inside its cells called trimethylamine N-oxide, or TMAO for short. You actually know this chemical. TMAO is a common osmolyte found in all saltwater fish, and it's the molecule responsible for that fishy smell when it starts to decay. In a surface fish, it exists in small amounts. In the Mariana snailfish, its cells are saturated with it, in concentrations higher than in almost any other creature. Why? Because TMAO is a piezolyte, a pressure protector. It's a molecular scaffolding. At 16,000 psi, the water pressure is so immense it physically shoves and warps a creature's proteins, unfolding them, denaturing them, and stopping them from working. The snailfish's body floods its own cells with TMAO, and this molecule physically gets in the way. It supports the proteins. It braces them from the outside, preventing them from being crushed and unraveled. It allows the fish to exist, to have a functioning body, in a place that should be impossible. The snailfish is not a tank of steel, it is a masterpiece of chemistry. And this leads to the most profound and most tragic irony of all. The snailfish needs the pressure. Its entire body, its chemistry, its cellular structure is in a perfect, delicate, high-stakes balance with that 16,000 psi. The crushing external pressure is the only thing holding its fragile body together. We know this because we have tried to catch one. In 2017, a lander managed to trap several and bring them to the surface. The moment they were lifted out of that high-pressure zone, their reverse implosion began. Without the 16,000 psi pushing in, their own internal cellular chemistry, the very water in their bodies, caused them to disintegrate. By the time they reached the deck, they had melted. They were nothing but a puddle of gelatinous goo. It's the ultimate alien. A creature so perfectly, so completely adapted to its other world that it is physically incapable of surviving in ours. It belongs to the pressure. It is a small, pink, fragile ghost, held together by the weight of 7 miles of ocean. And it is the true, undisputed ruler of the bottom of the world. The Hadal Snailfish has shown us that life can adapt to any pressure. But that life, like almost everything we've seen, is still part of a top-down economy. It's still at the end of its long food chain, powered by the sun. It eats the creatures that eat the creatures that eat the marine snow, which is just the ghost of the sunlit photic zone. For a century after the Challenger expedition, this was the undisputed rule. All life in the deep is scavenging. The deep sea is an energy desert, surviving on the crumbs that fall from the table above. Then came 1977. We're going to ascend from the 7-mile deep Hadal zone back up to the shallow abyssal plain, about 2,500 meters, 8,200 feet, down. We're in a new, state-of-the-art submersible, the DS-5 Alvin. It's a true 3-person submarine, the modern descendant of the Trieste, capable of maneuvering and working at these depths. A team of geologists is using Alvin to explore the Galapagos Rift, a mid-ocean ridge where the tectonic plates are pulling apart. They aren't looking for life. They're looking for geology. They are expecting a cold 4 degrees Celsius, dead, boring seafloor covered in mud and marine snow. Then, Alvin's external temperature probe, which has been reading a steady 4 degrees Celsius for the entire dive, suddenly spikes. The water around them is 8 degrees Celsius, 10 degrees Celsius, 16 degrees Celsius. They are in a hot zone. They pilot the sub over a volcanic rise, and for the first time, human eyes look upon a hellscape. Before them is a field of what look like Gothic, 30-foot-tall, gnarled church spires made of pure black rock. And from the top of these chimneys, a plume of what looks like oily black smoke is belching into the water. They are hydrothermal vents, or black smokers. This is a place where the seawater has seeped miles down into the Earth's crust, been superheated by magma, and is now blasting back out. That smoke isn't smoke at all. It's 700-degree Fahrenheit water, 370 degrees Celsius, so loaded with dissolved minerals like sulfur, iron, and zinc that it precipitates when it hits the cold ocean, building these chimneys of solid rock. But that wasn't the discovery. The hellscape was the discovery. The geologists in the sub then did something that changed biology forever. They panned the camera down. The Alvin crew was expecting nothing. This water is anoxic, no oxygen, and loaded with hydrogen sulfide, a chemical lethal to 99% of all life on Earth, the same rotten egg poison as the brine pools. This should be a sterile dead zone. It was a city. It was the single densest, most alive ecosystem they had ever seen in the deep. The black spires were completely covered. There were fields of ghost white crabs scuttling over each other. There were dense beds of mussels, their shells shimmering. And then there were the worms. Thickets of giant tube worms, 6 feet tall, as thick as your arm. They had no eyes, no mouth, no gut, no anus. They were just a white, chitinous tube, and sprouting from the top was a bright red, feathery plume, looking like a grotesque lipstick, as one scientist put it. This was the ultimate paradox, a thriving, dense, massive ecosystem in total darkness, in a poison bath, miles from the sun. The marine snow here was a negligible dusting. This city could not exist. But it did. The Alvin dive of 1977 is the single most important moment in modern biology, because it forced us to ask the most fundamental question: what are they eating? It took years to figure it out, but the answer changed the definition of life. They were not eating food. They were making it. Those giant tube worms, with no mouth or stomach, are actually a housing unit. Inside their bodies is a special, fleshy organ called a trophosome, and it is packed with a unique kind of symbiotic bacteria. This is the genius of the system. That blood-red plume on the worm is its lung. It absorbs 2 things from the water: hydrogen sulfide, the poison from the vent, and a little bit of oxygen from the surrounding seawater. The worm's specialized blood then delivers this fuel to the bacteria living safely inside its gut. And the bacteria eat the poison. In a process called chemosynthesis, the bacteria oxidize the hydrogen sulfide. They use the chemical energy from that reaction to do the same thing a plant does with sunlight. They take carbon, and they fix it into sugar. The bacteria get a safe place to live. The tube worm gets a stomach full of bacteria that feed it a constant, on-demand diet of pure sugar. This was it. The biggest discovery. For all of human history, from the first caveman eating a berry to the 1970s scientist, we had a law of biology. All life on Earth is solar-powered. It's all based on photosynthesis. Plants eat the sun. Animals eat the plants. In 1977, we learned that law was wrong. This was a second genesis, a completely independent tree of life that runs on geothermal energy. It's not based on the sun, it's based on the heat of the planet itself. This discovery immediately blew the doors off the origin of life debate. Charles Darwin, in 1871, had famously mused that life began in a warm little pond on the surface. But now, historians and astrobiologists were in a frenzy. The scholarly debate had a new candidate. What if life didn't start on the surface, which was being pummeled by UV radiation and asteroids? What if it started here, in these deep-sea vents, a protected, energy-rich, mineral-rich cradle? And the implications went far, far beyond Earth. If life can exist without sunlight, based on chemical energy from geothermal heat, what about Jupiter's moon, Europa? We know it has a vast liquid ocean, larger than all of Earth's, hidden under its ice shell. We know it's tidally heated by Jupiter's gravity. It must have hydrothermal vents on its seafloor. The Alvin dive of 1977 didn't just find a weird worm. It gave us the single most profound hint that we are, perhaps, not alone. It told us that life is not a miracle of sunlight. It is a chemical inevitability. The hydrothermal vents changed everything. They proved that life could exist without the sun, thriving on pure geothermal chemical energy. It was a second genesis that opened our minds to life on other planets. But this life from heat is not the only oasis in the deep-sea desert. There is another, one that isn't born from the planet's internal fire, but from the greatest death in the world above. We're going to journey back to the abyssal plain, that vast, flat, muddy expanse 3 miles down. It's the starvation economy, where the only food is the constant slow drift of marine snow. Here, a creature might wait its entire life for a meal. And then, one day, the jackpot arrives. An 80-foot, 150-ton blue whale, after a long life in the photic zone, dies. Its massive body, a mountain of organized calories, begins its long, final descent. It tumbles for hours, past the twilight zone, past the midnight zone, landing on the soft mud of the abyssal floor with a silent, seismic thud. This is a whale fall. For the zombie microbes and slow-moving creatures of the abyss, this is the equivalent of 1,000,000 years' worth of marine snow arriving all at once. It will trigger a bloom of life, a new temporary city that will last for a century. Biologists have classified this process into 4 distinct overlapping stages. Stage 1, the mobile scavenger stage. This one is fast, brutal, and cinematic. The thud of the landing and the plume of scent from the carcass travels for miles. And the first responders arrive, and they arrive fast. These are the big scavengers. The sleeper sharks, those ancient, slow-moving cousins of the Greenland shark. And the hagfish. The hagfish are, without question, the most disgusting and most efficient creatures on Earth. They are slime eels. They are jawless, almost blind, and their primary defense is to excrete a protein that turns the water around them into a thick, choking slime in seconds. They arrive in the hundreds. They don't bite the whale. They enter it. They burrow into the carcass through the mouth, the anus, or any open wound, and they eat the whale from the inside out. Within a matter of months to a few years, this shark and hagfish swarm will strip 90% of the soft tissue from the skeleton, a feeding frenzy in the total black. Stage 2, the enrichment opportunist stage. The big scavengers are full, and they've left. Now, the mud around the whale is the new buffet. The surrounding sediment, for yards in every direction, is now enriched, soaked in decaying blubber, oils, and blubber-soaked soil. This attracts the smaller, opportunist creatures. This is when the worms, the small crustaceans, the mollusks, and the snailfish arrive. They aren't feeding on the whale anymore. They are feeding on the leftovers that have turned the seafloor into a greasy paradise. This stage can last for another 2 years. Stage 3, the sulfophilic, or sulfur-loving stage. This is where it gets weird. This is the stage that baffled scientists for years. The soft tissue is gone. The enriched soil is picked clean. All that is left is a skeleton. This should be the end of the story. But it's the beginning of the most profound and most long-lasting stage of all. A whale's skeleton isn't just bone. It's packed with lipids, fats, and oils. Up to 60% of the bone's weight is pure fat. Deep inside the bone, in the anoxic, oxygen-free marrow, a special kind of anaerobic bacteria begins to get to work. They are eating the fats, and as they break them down, their waste product is hydrogen sulfide, the rotten egg poison, the exact same chemical that is belching out of a hydrothermal vent. The whale skeleton, in its final act of death, becomes a vent. It's no longer a food source, It's a chemical source. It begins to leak hydrogen sulfide into the surrounding water. And this scent, this chemical signal, is a dinner bell. It attracts the same chemosynthetic bacteria that we found at the Black Smokers, and it attracts one of the most specialized, most alien creatures ever discovered. We call it Osedax, which is Latin for bone-eater. Its common name is the zombie worm, or the bone-eating snot flower. When you see Osedax, all you see is a red, feathery, flower-like plume, growing out of the solid bone. It looks like a plant. It's not. That red flower is the creature's gills. It has no mouth, no stomach, no gut. The body of the Osedax is a green, root-like system that it bores into the solid bone. It secretes a powerful acid that dissolves the bone, and it uses this root system to absorb the fats locked inside. And inside those roots are the symbiotic chemosynthetic bacteria. The bacteria eat the fats and sulfides, and in return, they feed the Osedax. A single whale skeleton, which should be a monument to death, becomes a zombie city. It's a thriving chemosynthetic community of worms, bacteria, crabs, and mussels, all running on the geothermal energy of decay that can last for 50 to 100 years. The deep sea is so efficient, it has found a way to turn death into life. These oases of life, the vents and the whale falls, are both powered by chemical energy. They are anomalies, hotspots of activity in the vast, cold mud. But the deep sea has one more, perhaps even more bizarre, alternate ecosystem. It's not a vent, and it's not a skeleton. It's a lake. We're going to ascend again to a shallower depth of about 700 meters, or 2,300 feet, into the Gulf of Mexico. This area is one of the most heavily explored parts of the deep ocean, not by scientists, but by industry. It's covered in oil rigs, pipelines, and a constant buzz of ROV activity from companies mapping the seafloor. And in the 1980s, these commercial ROV pilots started seeing something impossible. The pilot would be flying the ROV over the dark, muddy, sloping seafloor. And then, suddenly, they'd fly over a beach. Below them, there would be a distinct shoreline, and beyond that, a lake. A perfectly still, eerily calm body of water that looked different from the surrounding ocean. It was shimmery, almost oily. The ROV's sonar would reflect off its surface. They had found a lake at the bottom of the ocean. This was, of course, physically impossible. Water can't be a lake inside of water. But these ROVs were not wrong. They had discovered brine pools. The Gulf of Mexico, it turns out, is sitting on top of massive, ancient, buried layers of salt, left over from when the sea evaporated millions of years ago. As the seafloor shifts, seawater gets pushed into these salt layers, and it becomes supersaturated, dissolving the salt until it's 4 or 5 times saltier than normal seawater. This new super salty brine is now incredibly dense. It's so heavy that when it seeps back out of the seafloor, it doesn't mix with the normal ocean water. It sinks. It flows downhill along the abyssal plain, just like a river on land, and it pools in the hollows and craters, forming a perfectly level, perfectly still lake of brine. It has a surface. It has a shoreline. When the ROV bumps it, you can see waves ripple across its surface, just like a pond. But this is no swimming hole. This is perhaps the most toxic place on the planet. This brine, as it seeps up, also get saturated with other things: methane gas and hydrogen sulfide, the rotten egg poison from the vents and the whale falls. And because this brine is so dense and doesn't mix, it contains zero dissolved oxygen. It is anoxic. These are not brine pools, they are lakes of death. Pilots quickly learned this. They would watch a deep-sea crab, scuttling along the mud, accidentally step off the shoreline and into the water. The crab would go into instant toxic shock. It would flail for a few seconds as the anoxic, sulfide-rich brine poisoned it, and then it would die. Because the brine is so pickling, a high-salt, anoxic environment, the creatures don't even decay. The ROVs would find the shorelines of these pools littered with the preserved, pickled corpses of fish, crabs, and isopods that had made one fatal mistake. The lake was a graveyard. This is where the real mystery begins, the one that relates back to the original video's brine pool visitors. Because when scientists began to study these pools, they found the same thing the ROV operators did. The lake was dead, but the shoreline, the rim of the lake, was alive. It was covered in life. Dense, thick, thriving fields of mussels, hundreds of thousands of them, packed shoulder to shoulder, right on the edge of the poison. And living among the mussels were familiar friends: giant tube worms, crabs, and shrimp. It was a paradox. How could you have a thriving city built on the beach of a lake of pure death? The answer, once again, is chemosynthesis. This was another second genesis. These creatures were not afraid of the poison. They were feeding on it. Those mussels, packed on the shore, have symbiotic bacteria living in their gills, and they are positioned perfectly. They are sitting in the normal ocean, so they can filter normal oxygen from the seawater. But their foot, or byssal threads, are dipped into the brine, or at least right at the surface where the methane and hydrogen sulfide are leaking out of the lake. They are performing the exact same trick as the tube worms at the vent. They are breathing the oxygen from one world and eating the poison from another. They are harvesting the methane. The entire ecosystem is based on this relationship. The mussels eat the methane. The crabs and shrimp then graze on the bacteria on the mussel shells, or they eat the mussels themselves. They are all, in effect, methane-powered. They are living, quite literally, on the edge. A single, wrong step, 1 inch too far, and they fall into the poison lake and die. It's an entire thriving city built on the shore of a toxic waste dump. A world that has learned to not just survive the poison, but to eat it for breakfast. We've explored the oases of the deep, the chemical-spewing vents, the century-long feasts of the whale falls, and the deadly methane-powered shores of the brine pools. But these are all anomalies. They are the exceptions to the rule of the deep sea, which, for the most part, we've always pictured as that vast, cold, endless, flat expanse of mud, the abyssal plain. For most of the 20th century, we assumed that vast, muddy plain was the entire deep sea. It was a logical assumption, but it was just as wrong as the Azoic hypothesis. It wasn't until the 1950s, after World War II had perfected the science of sonar, that we got our first real picture of the ocean floor. A brilliant cartographer named Marie Tharp, working with her colleague Bruce Heason, began the painstaking multi-decade process of plotting all that new sonar data. When her first maps were published, they were a revelation. They were a scientific revolution that was, at the time, as shocking as the first images of Earth from space. The seafloor was not flat. Marie Tharp's maps showed for the first time that the seafloor was covered in the world's largest mountain ranges, the mid-ocean ridges, which wrap around the globe like the seam on a baseball. It was covered in the world's deepest canyons, trenches that dwarf the Grand Canyon. And it was covered in mountains. Not just ridges, but thousands upon thousands of standalone, massive, individual mountains. We call them seamounts. The official scientific definition is a seamount is any underwater mountain, usually an extinct volcano, that rises at least 1,000 meters, 3,300 feet, from the surrounding seafloor, but does not break the surface. If it does break the surface, we have a different name for it. We call it an island, like Hawaii. These are not small, gentle hills. They are the underwater Himalayas. The average seamount is taller than almost any mountain on the dry continents. And they are everywhere. Scientists using satellite altimetry, which can detect the bump in the sea surface caused by the mountain's gravity, now estimate that there are over 100,000 seamounts on Earth. And here is the single most humbling fact of our entire journey tonight. Of those 100,000 individual underwater worlds, fewer than 300 have ever been studied, have ever been seen by an R. That is 0.3%. Over 99% of this entire global biome is a complete mystery. We know, without exaggeration, far more about the high-resolution topography of Mars and the Moon than we do about the seamounts on our own planet. When early crude sonar systems first detected some of these, especially the ones called guyots, pronounced geos, the public imagination, already primed for mystery, went into overdrive. Guyos are seamounts that have strangely, unnaturally flat tops. To a public raised on legends of sunken civilizations, these looked like foundations. They looked like roads. They looked like the man-made, sunken city of Atlantis. This fringe tidbit of speculation became a huge fad. The geological reality is just as fascinating. These flat-topped seamounts were once islands. They were volcanoes that rose above the surface, and their tops were planed flat by the constant grinding action of surface waves. Then, as the tectonic plate they were riding on cooled and sagged over millions of years, they were carried away from the hot spot that formed them, and they sank. Slowly back into the abyss, carrying that flat top with them like a tombstone of their former life. So why are these 100,000 mountains so important? Because they are the opposite of the abyssal desert. They are islands of biodiversity. They are the real cities of the deep, and the reason is a simple, elegant piece of physics we call the seamount effect. The deep sea has slow, but incredibly powerful continent-sized currents. For millions of years, this current just plows, unimpeded, over the flat, muddy plain. But then, it hits the wall of a 2-mile-high seamount. The water has nowhere to go, but up. This upwelling acts like a giant, invisible, hydraulic plow. It dredges up the nutrient-rich marine snow and detritus that has settled in the deep, and it forces it up the mountainside into the shallower, sun-dappled twilight zone. This upwelling of nutrients creates a hot spot, a gas station, in the middle of a 1,000-mile desert. The nutrients trigger a bloom of plankton. The plankton attracts krill. The krill attracts schools of fish. The fish attract sharks, tuna, and whales. Seamounts become the local watering holes, the neighborhood bars of the deep ocean, teeming with migratory life. But the real treasures are the things that live on the seamount, the permanent residents. Because the current is constantly sweeping the rock clean of mud, it provides a hard surface for things to attach to. And this is where you find the gardens. You find deep-sea coral. Yes, coral. Not the green photosynthetic coral of the Great Barrier Reef. This is coral that needs no sunlight. It's often a ghostly pale white, or a deep blood red. It is ancient. It is a filter feeder that just sits on the rock face, its fans spread wide, catching the plankton being delivered to it by the seamount's personal food delivery current. These are museums of life. We have found coral forests on seamounts that are thousands of years old. A single bush-like colony of black coral can have a lifespan of over 4,000 years. They were born when the pyramids of Giza were being built, and they are still alive today. Because each seamount is an island, totally isolated from the next one by hundreds of miles of desert. They are hot spots for evolution. Life here gets trapped. A larval coral or a small crab that lands on this seamount will live, die, and reproduce only on that seamount. Over millions of years, they become new species. Scientists are still debating just how rapidly speciation occurs on these mounts, but the evidence is stunning. When an OV does visit a new seamount, they find, on average, that up to 30% of the creatures they see are new to science and exist only on that single solitary mountain. They are, quite literally, 100,000 unique, undiscovered worlds. We have explored the seamounts, those 100,000 hidden islands of life. We've seen the hydrothermal vents, the brine pools, the whale falls. We have journeyed from the Challenger expedition's muddy dredge to the Trieste's landing at the bottom of the world. We've defined the boundaries of the deep sea, from the Twilight Zone to the Hadal Zone. We've mapped the floor of the ocean. It would be easy now to say that our journey is complete, that we have finally reached the bottom of the biosphere. But we would be wrong, because the seafloor isn't the bottom. The true final frontier, the cellar of the planet, is under the seafloor. The final great and almost completely unknown biome on Earth is the deep biosphere. It's the life that exists inside the planet's rocky crust. For decades, we've drilled for oil and gas, but it wasn't until the 2010s that a massive international deep carbon observatory project began to systematically drill for life. Using massive high-tech drilling ships, like the JOID's Resolution, scientists began to do something that sounds simple, but is technically staggering. They cored the seafloor. They dropped miles of drill pipe through miles of water, to then drill another 2 miles down into the solid rock and sediment of the Earth's crust. Then they would pull that core sample back up. It's a cylinder of rock and compacted mud, a history book of the planet. And when they took these cores, these pristine samples of the Earth's interior, back to the lab, and looked at them under a microscope, they found something that shattered every biological model we had. It was full of life, not complex life, not worms or fish, but microbes, bacteria and archaea, an even more ancient, simpler form of life. And they weren't just in the mud near the surface. They were deep inside the solid volcanic basalt rock, miles down. The sheer scale of this discovery is what's truly mind-bending. When the scientists from the Deep Carbon Observatory finally published their consensus report in 2018, the numbers were almost unbelievable. They estimated that the total biomass of this underground life, all these tiny, simple cells, was somewhere between 15 and 23 billion tons of carbon. That's a number so big it's meaningless. So here's the comparison. That is 300 to 400 times the carbon mass of all 8 billion human beings on the surface. This shadow biosphere, this life inside the rock, is, by a massive margin, the largest ecosystem on the planet. We are not the dominant life form on Earth. We are a rounding error. The real life on this planet is downstairs. This, of course, presented 1,000 new questions. How? How are they eating? How are they breathing? It's pitch black. There is no oxygen. There is no marine snow. There is nothing. This is where we meet the zombie microbes. They are starvation specialists that make the Greenland shark look like a hyperactive speed freak. They are barely alive. They are living in a state of near total stasis, their metabolism wound down to almost zero. They are eating the rock itself. In a process called chemolithoautotrophy, they are harvesting electrons from the iron in the surrounding basalt. Or they are eating the hydrogen and methane that is cooked out of the rock by the planet's internal heat. They are, quite literally, powered by geology. Their lifespan is not measured in years or even centuries. It's measured in millennia. Scientists studying these microbes using nano-SIMS technology, a way to track how one molecule moves through one cell, found that their metabolism is so impossibly slow that they may only divide or reproduce once every 1,000 years, or, in some cases, once every 10,000 years. These are creatures that have not evolved in any meaningful way since the last ice age. They are living on a geological timescale that makes our entire human civilization a blip. They are, for all intents and purposes, undead. And this has led to the single biggest, most profound, and most open scholarly debate in all of science, the shadow biosphere hypothesis. The question is this: is this life our life? Is it Tree of Life 1.0, the same DNA-based last universal common ancestor that all life on the surface, us, the fish, the trees, the plankton, evolved from? Or is it Tree of Life 2.0? This is the shadow biosphere idea. What if this life is different? What if it's a second independent genesis of life? What if it's not DNA-based? What if it uses a different operating system, like XNA or some other chemical we haven't even dreamed of? And this leads to the fringe, but plausible tidbit that sounds like a science fiction plot. What if they were here first? What if life on Earth didn't start in a warm little pond, or even a hydrothermal vent? What if it started inside the crust, in this protected, stable, energy-rich rock womb, safe from the surface which was being bombarded by asteroids and lethal UV radiation? What if we are the aliens? What if we are the weird, mutated branch of life that, one day, escaped the crust and invaded the surface? We don't know the answer. We have, as of today, no evidence of a non-DNA life form. Every microbe we've managed to sequence from down there has, so far, been part of our family. But we have only just started looking. We are standing at the shore of an internal underground ocean of life that is hundreds of times larger than our own, and we have no idea who or what is in it. We have been on a journey from the known to the barely known to the theoretically known. We've defined the physics of the deep, we've met the chemical eaters, and we've even uncovered a shadow biosphere of zombie microbes living inside the planet's crust. But now, we have to turn to the true unknown. We have to talk about the anomalies. We have to talk about the blobs. Our entire journey has been made possible by a new generation of explorers. After Beebe's bathysphere and the Trieste's plunge, the age of the hero in deep-sea exploration began to wane. It was too dangerous, too expensive, and too limited to keep sending fragile human bodies to the bottom. Starting in the 1970s, we entered the age of the ROV, the remotely operated vehicle. These are our new eyes. They are swimming, robotic camera platforms tethered to a ship on the surface by a fiber-optic cable, piloted by a scientist in a dark, air-conditioned control room on the ship. They are our proxies. They are expendable, and they are everywhere. And because they are always on, they are seeing things that a 1 in a million dive like Beebe's never could. They are capturing footage that baffles the very scientists who are controlling them. This is the blob problem. The internet is full of this stuff. You've seen the videos on cryptozoology forums. Mysterious creature filmed by oil rig. Abyssal blob stumps scientists. It's become a modern-day "here be dragons." Let's take one of the most famous examples from the original video, the Gulf of Mexico tube creature, or the blue blob. This was footage from a Shell Oil ROV. The pilot is skimming over the seafloor, and then this thing appears in the headlights. It's long, tubular, and a deep, iridescent blue. It looks like a dragon's tail, or an intestine, or a giant discarded plastic bag. It's pulsing. It's moving. It's clearly alive. In the control room, you can hear the scientists, the PhDs, getting on the radio. What is that? I have no idea. Is that one thing? I don't know. The video, of course, went viral. It was proof of a new unknown sea serpent. The probable answer is, in many ways, weirder than a sea serpent. The leading hypothesis is that this was a siphonophore, pronounced siphonophore. And a siphonophore is not a creature. It is 1,000 creatures. You're probably familiar with its most famous relative, the Portuguese man-o'-war. The man-o'-war is not a jellyfish. It is a colonial organism. It is an it, not a him. It's a floating city of thousands of tiny, individual, specialized persons called zooids. All these zooids are technically clones, but they have specialized for different jobs. There are pneumatophore zooids, the float. There are gastrozoid zooids, the stomachs. There are dactylozoid zooids, the stinging tentacles. And there are gonozoid zooids, the reproductive organs. It is a communist utopia of a creature, a single body made of thousands of individual specialists all working for the colony. What that ROV probably saw was a deep-sea siphonophore, perhaps one that had broken apart, and they were just filming one section of it. A section of the stomach chain, pulsing as it digested a meal. Not a monster, but a piece of a living, floating colonial train. This is the key to understanding the blob problem. The vast majority of all life in the deep sea, especially in that open water column, is gelatinous. It's jellyfish, ctenophores, comb jellies, siphonophores, and salps. Why? Because gelatin is the perfect building material for a starvation world. It is energetically cheap. It's just a tiny bit of protein and a lot of water. It's naturally buoyant, so you don't waste energy swimming. You just drift. And it's a great body plan for a filter feeder. You just become a living, drifting net, like the Deepstaria jellyfish. The problem is that these gelatinous creatures, when they are hit by a Challenger-style dredge net, are obliterated. They turn into slime. They are biologically invisible to our classical methods of science. It wasn't until we got ROVs, gentle, robotic eyes, that we even realized that the deep sea was the kingdom of the jellies. So, when an ROV sees a new blob, is it a monster? Or is it just a new species of ctenophore, a creature so alien in its body plan? They move using flapping plates of combs and hunt with sticky cells, not stinging cells, that our terrestrial fish and crab brains simply cannot process what we are looking at. Scientists are still debating just how many new phyla, or entire body plans, these gelatinous creatures represent. We are finding things that break our tidy tree of life classifications. The blue blob isn't unidentified because it's a monster. It's unidentified because it's so unfamiliar. It's an alien in the truest sense of the word, a life form from a gelatinous kingdom that we have only just begun to see. Let's dive deeper into that kingdom of the jellies. We've established that most blobs are just unfamiliar life forms, not sea monsters. But sometimes the ROV footage is so bizarre, so story-like, that it demands a different kind of explanation. This brings us to the Deepstaria enigma. The Deepstaria is a known, but very rarely seen, deep-sea jellyfish. It's a magnificent creature. It has no tentacles in the traditional sense. It's just a bell, a massive, delicate, billowing sheet of gelatin, thin as a plastic bag and as wide as a dinner table. It looks like a lava lamp given life, or a living grocery bag, as some scientists have called it. It's a sit-and-wait predator, just drifting, hoping a small shrimp or fish will blunder into its massive net of a body, at which point it closes the bag. In 2012, an ROV from the Hercules exploration vessel was filming at 2,500 feet when it encountered a Deepstaria. The footage is mesmerizing. The jellyfish just hangs in the water, its vast, thin body rippling with the current. But the scientists in the control room noticed something wrong. Inside the jellyfish's bell, there was a thing. You can see it plain as day in the footage. It's a small, bright red isopod, a crustacean, like the giant ones from the Challenger. And it's alive. It's scuttling around inside the jellyfish's bell, as if it's safe in there. At one point, it crawls right up to the edge of the bell and seems to look out at the ROV. It looks, for all the world, like a tiny red alien piloting a giant gelatinous spaceship. The original viral video version of this story, the one you'll find on those mystery forums, gets even weirder. It claims that when the ROV got close, its electronics were hit with EM interference, and that the isopod seemed to be controlling the jellyfish's movements. This is where we separate fact from fringe. The EM interference part is almost certainly pure creepypasta, added for dramatic effect, just like the lost footage of the oil rig serpent. But the sighting? The ROV, the jellyfish, and the pilot inside? That is 100% real. The scientists, baffled, did what scientists do. They decided to poke it. They extended the ROV's robotic manipulator arm and gave the Deepstaria's bell a gentle nudge. The jellyfish, as you'd expect, contracts. It pulls its entire bag body shut in a defensive reflex. And as it does, the red isopod vanishes. It crawls deeper into the jellyfish, disappearing into its gastrovascular cavity, its stomach area. So what exactly were we watching? Was this a creature being eaten in slow motion? Was it a parasite? Or was it, as it appeared, a pilot? This is a beautiful example of how the deep sea creates relationships we've never dreamed of. This was not a monster or a ghost in the machine. It was a hitchhiker. This is a known but incredibly rare form of symbiosis. The isopod is a parasite, but not a mind-controlling one. It's a shelter parasite. The deep sea is a very dangerous, very open place. If you are a small, bright red, and presumably tasty isopod, you are a target for every lanternfish in the neighborhood. You need a place to hide. So, what better place to hide than inside a giant, gelatinous, and mostly inedible safe house? The isopod, which is immune to the jellyfish's very weak sting, spends its entire life inside the Deepstaria's bell. It is completely safe from all predators. But what does the jellyfish get out of this? This is where the scholarly debate is still open. The relationship might be commensal, meaning the isopod gets a win, safety, and the jellyfish gets a 0. It's unharmed, just annoyed. But it's more likely to be mutualism, meaning both win. The isopod isn't just hiding, it's working. It's a cleaner. In return for rent, it likely preens the jellyfish, eating smaller other parasites that try to latch on. Or, even more likely, it just eats the crumbs. When the Deepstaria catches a shrimp in its bag, the isopod, from its safe perch inside, just crawls over and shares the meal. It's a win-win. The jellyfish gets a permanent live-in housekeeper, and the isopod gets a living, mobile, transparent fortress. This is the reality of the deep sea. It's not a supernatural event. It's a biological one. But the visual of it, the ghost in the machine, is so unsettling, so unterrestrial, that our brains want it to be a monster. It's a haunted house that's actually just a very clever, very weird roommate situation. It proves that the truth of the deep sea is often far more bizarre and far more ingenious than any mystery we could invent for it. That haunted house roommate situation of the Deepstaria shows us how complex and alien symbiosis can be. But let's be honest. We didn't come down here for roommates. We came for monsters. We've explored the blobs, the jellies, and the ghosts. Now it's time to talk about the titans. It's time to talk about the real kraken. We're going to journey to the deep, freezing waters of the Southern Ocean, surrounding Antarctica. This is the domain of a creature that is not a blob, not a myth, and not a misidentification. It is a real, confirmed flesh-and-blood monster. It is the colossal squid. Its scientific name is Mesonychoteuthis hamiltoni. And the first thing we have to do is clear up a very common, very public confusion. The colossal squid is not the same thing as the giant squid. For over a century, the giant squid, Architeuthis, was the kraken of record. It's the one you read about, the 40-foot-long serpent that supposedly battled 19th century sailing ships. And it is a giant. But it's a long giant. It's the greyhound of the deep. It's long, slender, and built for speed. The colossal squid is the heavyweight champion. It's the bulldog. It's shorter than the giant squid, but it is vastly heavier, bulkier, and more powerful. It is by mass the single largest invertebrate on the entire planet. We are talking about a creature estimated to be 30 to 45 feet long and weighing over half a ton. And it is built for war. This is not a gelatinous blob. This is an apex predator. Let's start with its eyes. The colossal squid has the largest eyes in the entire animal kingdom. Not just in the sea, on Earth. They are the size of dinner plates. Why? In the absolute pitch-black darkness of the Antarctic deep, these giant, low-light lenses are designed to suck in every available photon, to see the bioluminescent flashes of its prey, or its one great predator, from an impossible distance. But its true weapons are its arms. Like the giant squid, it has 8 arms and 2 long, feeding tentacles. But the giant squid's tentacles are lined with suckers, ringed with teeth to grip. The colossal squid thinks that's adorable. The colossal squid's tentacles, at the club end, are a nightmare. They are covered in a combination of suckers and hooks. Dozens of them. We're talking about 3-pointed, razor-sharp, swiveling talons, like a grappling hook designed by a medieval torture expert. This is not a creature that grabs its prey. It impales it, lacerates it, and shreds it, all while pulling it back towards its massive, parrot-like beak. The first partial specimen ever found in 1925 was just 2 of these arms, found in a sperm whale's stomach. This is the known giant. We have specimens. The most famous one, a 1,000-pound female, is currently floating in a giant tank in the Te Papa Museum in New Zealand after being accidentally caught by a fishing boat in 2007. So here is the colossal riddle. We have the bodies. We know they exist. And yet, in all of human history, with all of our ROVs, all of our submersibles, all of our Antarctic exploration, we have never, ever seen a living adult colossal squid in its natural deep-sea habitat. Not once. Think about that. The largest invertebrate on Earth, an active predator the size of a bus, with dinnerplate eyes and grappling hooks, is so good at hiding, so at home in the deep, freezing black, that it has completely evaded all human observation. Our only clues to its existence are 1. A handful of mostly juvenile specimens, like the one in New Zealand, that were accidentally caught on long lines by fishermen hunting for Patagonian toothfish. 2. A few carcasses found floating, half-decayed, on the surface. 3. And the beaks. Thousands and thousands of its hard, indigestible parrot-like beaks found in the stomachs of sperm whales. This is the ultimate humbling fact. The only reason we even know this half-ton, hook-covered titan exists is because it is the chief food source for the one creature on Earth that is big enough and deep-diving enough to hunt it. Scientists are still in a heated debate about how it hunts. Is it a fast pursuit predator like the giant squid? Or, given its heavy build and low-light eyes, is it a slow, sit-and-wait ambush predator, just hanging in the black, a minefield of swiveling hooks, waiting for a fish to swim too close? We don't know. We only know one thing for sure. It's down there. And it's huge. That sperm whale is the only reason we know the colossal squid exists. And that relationship is not a friendly one. It is the heavyweight title fight of the deep sea, a battle between the planet's largest toothed predator, the whale, and the planet's largest invertebrate, the squid. It is a war waged in total darkness, 2,000 meters down, and it is a war that has been going on for millions of years. And like any war, it leaves scars. This is the story number 1 from the old original video compilations of deep-sea mysteries. Since the 19th century, back in the Age of Sail, whalers, the men who hunted sperm whales for their oil, reported the same thing. When they would haul one of these 60-foot, 50-ton bull whales alongside their ship, they would find its massive, block-like head, and leathery hide covered in marks. The most common, and the ones that gave birth to the Moby Dick legends, were circular scars. These are the battle scars from the giant squid, the Architeuthis. They are perfect circles, sometimes toothed, left by the suckers on the squid's two long feeding tentacles. They are, in themselves, terrifying. They are the size of a silver dollar or a golf ball, and they are a permanent record of the fight. But that's not the only kind of scar that sailors and scientists have found. Sometimes they find slashes, parallel cuts, as if the whale was raked by claws. This, we are almost certain, is the autograph of the colossal squid. Not suckers, hooks. The swiveling razor-sharp talons of the colossal, leaving their mark on the whale's flesh as it fought for its life. But even that is not the real mystery, the real anomaly, the one that drives cryptozoologists and monster hunters into a frenzy, are the other circular scars. In the 1920s and 30s, naturalists and biologists, like the famed and often fringe scientist Ivan T. Sanderson, began to document reports of sucker scars on sperm whales that were not the size of a golf ball. They were, he claimed, the size of hubcaps or dinner plates. He and others chronicled multiple reports from whalers who had no reason to lie of circular sucker-shaped scars that were 18 inches across. Let's pause on that. An 18-inch scar from a sucker. The 45-foot, 1,000-pound colossal squid we have in the New Zealand Museum. Its grappling hooks and suckers are nowhere near that big, not even close. To leave a mark that wide, what size of squid are we talking about? The calculations are terrifying. You are talking about a creature vastly larger than the 45-foot Mesonychoteuthis. You are talking about a true kraken. This is where the open scholarly debate gets very heated, and it splits right down the middle, between mainstream science and romantic possibility. The mainstream scientific consensus, the boring explanation, is this. It's scar tissue. A young 20-foot sperm whale calf gets in a tussle with a normal 40-foot giant squid. It gets a normal 2-inch sucker scar on its head. Then the whale grows. Over the next 50 years, it grows into a 60-foot bull. Its skin stretches. And that 2-inch scar, like a bad old tattoo on a growing arm, stretches with it. It warps, it expands, until that 2-inch circle is now a faded 18-inch oval. This is the logical, sober, and most likely explanation. But what if it's not? This is the 100-foot squid hypothesis. This is the romantic side of the debate. What if the 45-foot, 1,000-pound colossal squid we've found is just a teenager? Remember the Greenland shark. It's a juvenile until it's 150 years old. What if the colossal squid, as a deep-sea gigantism specialist, follows the same rule? What if the average ones we've accidentally caught are just the kids, and the true 500-year-old patriarchs or matriarchs of the species, the ones living in the deepest, most inaccessible parts of the Antarctic, are 100 feet long or 150 feet? What if they weigh 10 tons? This theory reframes the entire predator-prey dynamic. A bull sperm whale, the apex predator, expends a colossal amount of energy to dive 2,000 meters down. Is it really doing that just to snack on half-ton juveniles? Or is it diving that deep to hunt its white whale? Is it going down there to fight the only thing in the ocean that is a true match for it? A 100-foot, hook-covered, unseen giant. A creature whose only calling card is the 18-inch dinner plate scar it leaves behind? We don't know. That 100-foot squid hypothesis is a chilling one. It suggests a food chain of titans, a level of predator and prey that exists far beyond our human scale. But at least that battle is happening in the alien world of the deep, a 2-mile-down Colosseum between a whale and a squid. But what if that super-predator dynamic isn't limited to the abyss? What if the monsters are hunting in our world? What if the apex predator of the sunlit zone, the one we all know, the one we've made movies about, is actually just food? This brings us to one of the most compelling and terrifying pieces of mystery data ever recorded. We're going to travel to the temperate coastal waters of Australia, and we're going to talk about shark alpha. In 2003, a team of Australian researchers, including biologist Dave Riggs, was engaged in a massive tagging program. Their goal was to understand the movements of the great white shark, Carcharodon carcharias. One of their subjects was a 9-foot, healthy, robust female. They nicknamed her Alpha. They attached a PAT tag to her dorsal fin, a sophisticated archival tag that records everything: water temperature, pressure, which tells you depth, and light levels, which tells you location. The plan was simple. The tag would record data for 4 months, then pop off, float to the surface, and broadcast its location to a satellite, allowing the scientists to go and retrieve it. 4 months later, the tag pinged. It was found washed ashore on a beach. The scientists were thrilled. They took it back to the lab to download the data, eager to see where Alpha had spent her summer. What they found was not a migration map. It was a murder scene. The data starts out perfectly normal. You can see the shark's daily routine. She's swimming in the photic zone, in the top 100 meters, patrolling the coast, her movements matching the day-night cycle. She is the classic top-of-the-food-chain hunter. And then, on Christmas Eve, the data goes insane. At 4 a.m., in the pre-dawn blackness, the shark is swimming normally. Suddenly, the tag records a plunge, a high-speed vertical dive. Alpha plummets from her normal cruising depth, straight down, hitting a depth of 580 meters, 1,902 feet, in just a few minutes. This is a terrifying dive. A 9-foot great white does not go to the twilight zone. It has no reason to. It's not built for that pressure. But the depth wasn't the scary part. It was the temperature. At that 580-meter depth, the water temperature should be freezing. The tag should have read about 7 degrees Celsius, 46 degrees Fahrenheit. Instead, the instant the shark hit that 580-meter mark, the tag's temperature sensor spiked. It shot up, stabilized, and then held at 26 degrees Celsius, or 78 degrees Fahrenheit. This number, 26 degrees Celsius, is a magic number in shark biology. It is the internal stomach temperature of a great white shark. There was only one inescapable, horrifying conclusion. Alpha had been eaten. Something else out there, in the 4 a.m. darkness, had attacked and swallowed a 9-foot great white shark whole. The plunge was the super predator diving after it had eaten her. And that 26 degrees Celsius reading? That was the tag, inside the killer's stomach, calmly recording the digestive environment. The tag stayed in that stomach for 8 days, slowly dissolving, before it was expelled, and finally floated to the surface. This, of course, blew up. The media went wild. A mystery super predator that hunts great whites? This is the stuff of nightmares. The case was so compelling, it was the entire basis for a History Channel documentary, where this fringe theory was given top billing. Was this a megalodon? Was this proof that the 60-foot prehistoric super shark was still alive, hiding in the deep and snacking on its modern, puny 9-foot cousins? Almost certainly. No. There is zero credible evidence for a surviving Carcharodon megalodon, but the actual scientific consensus, the real hypothesis that the scientists, including Riggs, landed on, is, in its own way, just as scary. What is the one thing in the ocean that is known to hunt great white sharks? What is the one thing that is big enough, generates its own internal warm-blooded heat, a process called regional endothermy, and is capable of diving to 580 meters? The answer was another great white shark. This was not a monster. This was cannibalism. The scientists concluded that Alpha wasn't eaten by a megalodon. She was eaten by a Carcharodon colossus, a much larger, 16 to 20-foot, 2-ton female great white. This is a known, though rarely documented, behavior. Large, dominant females will, on occasion, attack and kill smaller, rival sharks to defend their territory. Alpha wasn't hunted. She was executed. She was a 9-foot apex predator who made the fatal mistake of swimming into the kill zone of a 20-foot matriarch. The scholarly debate, for a time, was could it have been an orca, killer whale? Orcas are known to hunt great whites. It's a fringe specialty for some pods, and they are warm-blooded. But the temperature profile didn't quite match an orca's, and the behavior of a dive and digest didn't fit. The cannibal shark hypothesis remains the strongest one. This incident, this shark alpha data, is a terrifying reminder. We call them apex predators, but every apex predator is prey to something bigger. Even in the sunlit world we think we know, there are always bigger sharks in the water. That cannibal shark incident is a stark reminder that our neat, tidy food chains are often just suggestions. There is always a bigger shark. But for most of human history, the bigger shark wasn't another shark at all. It was the serpent. We're going to leave the world of known predators and return to the world of myth. For centuries, the single most enduring, most global monster in the Sailor's Handbook was the great sea serpent. This wasn't the kraken. This was a different beast, a long, snake-like, horse-headed creature that would rise from the depths to swallow ships whole. This myth should have died with the sea monk and sea bishop. But it didn't. Reports of sea serpents, often by credible witnesses like naval officers and priests, continued right into the 19th and 20th centuries. So, were they all hallucinating? Or were they seeing something? It's time we meet the Oarfish. If you were tasked with designing a creature to create a sea serpent myth, you would design this. Its scientific name is Regalicus glesne, or the king of herrings, but it is, most notably, the longest bony fish in the world. This is not a giant eel. This is a fish, and it is a spectacularly weird one. It can grow to verified lengths of 36 feet, 11 meters, with unconfirmed reports putting it at over 50 feet. Its body is not muscular and snake-like. It's thin, ribbon-like, and covered in a silvery, scaleless skin called guanine that comes off like tinfoil when you touch it. And to top off the mythic look, it has no real tail, but it does have a massive, vermilion-red, plume-like mane that runs the entire length of its body, its dorsal fin, and rises into a crown of red filaments on its head. It is, for all intents and purposes, a 36-foot-long silver and red river streamer with a face. And where does this bizarre creature live? It's a citizen of the twilight zone, the mesopelagic. It spends its life hanging vertically, almost motionless, between 200 and 1,000 meters down, its head up, its tail down, just waiting to filter feed on tiny krill and crustaceans. This is why we never, ever see them. They are not rare. They are just deep. They have no commercial value. They are poor swimmers, and thus avoid nets, and they never come to the surface. Unless they are about to die, this is the only time we ever interact with the oarfish. The only reason we know they exist is because they wash ashore, dead or dying. And this is where the real mystery, the modern-day myth, begins. Because these wash-ups are not entirely random. For centuries, people living on coastlines, particularly in Japan and California, noticed a terrifying correlation. The oarfish wash ashore right before a major earthquake. This connection is so strong in Japanese folklore that the oarfish has a mythic name, Ryugu no Tsukai. This translates to the messenger from the sea god's palace. The historical mainstream belief is that these deep-sea messengers are sent by the gods to rise from their palace on the seabed to warn the surface dwellers of an impending catastrophic quake. This isn't just ancient history. After the devastating 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami, the Japanese media was flooded with reports and anecdotal data of dozens of oarfish having washed ashore in the 2 years leading up to the disaster. So what is going on? Is this just confirmation bias? You ignore the 50 oarfish that wash up for no reason, but you remember the one that washed up before the big one? This is a massive and very active scholarly debate, and the scientific community is completely divided. On one side, you have the mainstream consensus. This theory argues that the oarfish is a terrible swimmer. It's a plankton eater and just hangs in the deep stable water column. When an earthquake is brewing, the foreshocks, the P waves that are too weak for us to feel, are already vibrating that deep water. These vibrations, or perhaps the toxic gases, like radon, that are squeezed out of the grinding fault lines, disorient these incredibly sensitive, weak-swimming fish. They go into shock, they die, and their long, buoyant bodies are carried by the currents to the surface, where they wash ashore as a coincidence. The omen is just a result of the foreshock, not a warning of the future quake. But then, there's the fringe idea. This is the quirky tidbit that gives you chills. What if the oarfish are true messengers? We know that rocks under immense stress, like a fault line about to snap, release electromagnetic pulses. What if this deep-sea creature, living its entire life in total darkness, has evolved to be incredibly sensitive to these electromagnetic changes? What if it's the canary in the coal mine? We know, or at least we've heard the stories, that dogs freak out before a quake, that catfish in tanks go wild. What if the oarfish is the ultimate seismic sensor, and when it feels the charge building in the rock, it panics and flees? Right up to the surface, the only escape route it knows? As of today, the cause and effect is completely unproven. But the correlation is real. It is documented. We are left with a chilling thought. Our most mythical monster, the great sea serpent, is not only real, but it might also be a living 36-foot-long paranormal earthquake detector. The oarfish is the perfect real candidate for the sea serpent myth. It's long, it's silvery, it's deep-dwelling, and it washes ashore under mysterious, omen-like circumstances. For 99% of serpent sightings, the oarfish is a neat, tidy, and satisfying scientific explanation. But then, there's the 1%. This is where we leave the world of science and enter the world of pure cryptozoology. This is the oil rig serpent. This story is not a sighting by a 19th century sailor. It's a modern-day anomaly, and you've probably heard it. The story goes like this. In 2017, or 2015, or 2013, the date always changes, an ROV, piloted by a commercial crew, was doing a routine inspection of a deep-sea riser on an oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico, thousands of feet down. The ROV's headlights cut through the dark. And then it appeared. The story, as told on creepypasta forums and in late-night mystery YouTube videos, is that the operators saw a massive serpentine creature, as thick as a telephone pole, and hundreds of feet long. It wasn't a fish, it was a serpent. It moved with a sinusoidal, snake-like motion. It had, according to some versions, glowing eyes and a plated head. And then it attacked. The legend says the creature struck the ROV, that the pilot saw a cavernous mouth and rows of teeth before the camera feed went to static. The ROV was lost or damaged. The footage, when it was finally recovered, was immediately confiscated by the oil company, Shell, BP, the company always changes, and was classified, buried under non-disclosure agreements. Let's be perfectly, unequivocally clear. Is this story real? Almost certainly not. It is a creepypasta. It is a modern digital campfire story. It's the 21st century sea monk. It has all the hallmarks of a legend. The lost or classified footage, the "my dog ate it" excuse, the anonymous source, the friend of a friend who was in the control room, the escalating details. Every time the story is retold, the serpent gets bigger. So, the story is fake. But our mission tonight is to ask the next question. The fun question. What if it's not? Let's just what if this. Let's say the story is fake, but the idea, the plausibility of an undiscovered giant serpentine something in the deep, is real. What could it be? What known biology could we stretch to fit this monster? Candidate 1. The frilled shark, Chlamydocelicus anguineus. This is a real living fossil that haunts the deep sea. It is a shark, but it looks nothing like a great white. It has a long, slender, eel-like body, hence anguineus, or eel-like, and it has 6 pairs of frilly gills that give it a dragon-like appearance. Its mouth is not under its head like a normal shark. It's at the front, terminal, and it's filled with hundreds of 3-pronged, trident-like teeth, pointed backward. It's a 6-foot-long swimming nightmare. So, is this our serpent? No. It's a shark, not a serpent, and it's just too small. Candidate 2. A truly massive eel. We know the European eel, Anguilla anguilla, is one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in biology. We know how they're born, as leptocephalus larvae. We know where they live, our rivers, but we still don't know where they spawn. Their entire adult reproductive life is a complete black box. What if the reason we've never found their spawning ground is because the spawners, the adults, are deep-sea creatures. And what if in that deep-sea environment some of them just keep growing? This brings us to a quirky tidbit of evolutionary theory called Cope's rule. Named after the 19th century paleontologist Edward Drinker Cope, this is the very real, historically observed tendency for animal lineages to increase in body size over evolutionary time. Think of the first tiny dog-sized horse, Eohippus, evolving over 50 million years into the massive equus of today. Scholars still debate how universal this rule is. After all, sometimes getting smaller, like a hummingbird, is the better evolutionary strategy. But what if Cope's rule does apply to a creature like the eel in a stable, predator-free, for it, environment like the deep sea? What if the average 3-foot river eel is just the larva, and the true adult form, the 500-year-old Greenland shark version of an eel, is 100 feet long? This is pure, wonderful speculation. We have zero evidence for it, but here is the plausibility argument that keeps this monster hunt alive. 150 years ago, if you had stood on a whaler's deck and described the colossal squid, a half-ton, hook-covered predator with dinner-plate eyes, you would have been laughed off the ship. You would have been a teller of tall tales. If you had described the Oarfish, a 36-foot silver and red ribbon that acts as an earthquake detector, you would have been mad. If you had described Osedax, a zombie snot flower that eats bones with acid roots, you would have been a fantasist. Every single monster we have actually found in the deep sea is more bizarre than the monsters we invented. The oil rig serpent story is fake. But the idea of an undiscovered giant serpentine creature in a realm that is 80% unexplored is no crazier than the reality we have already discovered. We've spent a lot of time on monsters we can see or imagine seeing. The serpents, the sharks, the colossal squid. But the deep sea is a world of blackness. Sight is a secondary sense. The real language of this kingdom, especially for the creatures who aren't covered in bioluminescent cloaking devices, is sound. Sound in the deep ocean behaves in a way that's almost magical. The pressure and temperature layers of the deep, the thermocline, and the high pressure combine to create something called the SOFAR channel, or the deep sound channel. It's a horizontal layer of water, about 1,000 meters down, that acts as a perfect waveguide. Sound loves to travel in this channel. It gets trapped, bouncing between the layers, and it can travel unbelievable distances with almost no loss of signal. A sound that would die in a few miles in the air can cross an entire ocean in the SOFAR channel. This is the world of whale song. The blue whales and fin whales, the largest creatures on Earth, are bass singers. They create infrasonic sounds, so low frequency, 10 to 40 hertz, and so powerful that they are, quite literally, louder than a jet engine. They are not singing to a whale 100 feet away. They are communicating with a whale 1,000 miles away. They are using the SOFAR channel. It's their long-distance telephone. In 1989, we tapped the line. The US Navy, which had spent the entire Cold War lining the world's oceans with top-secret SOSUS hydrophone arrays, originally designed to track the sound signature of individual Soviet submarines, began to release some of this declassified data to scientists. A team at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution was sifting through these old Cold War tapes, and they heard a voice. It was unmistakably a whale. It had the signature of a blue whale, but wrong. It was singing, but it was out of tune. The sound was registering at 52 hertz. This may not sound like a big deal to you. 52 hertz is still a very low note, like the lowest A on a piano. But to a whale, this is a massive difference. Blue whales, the tenors of the deep, sing between 10 and 40 hertz. Fin whales, the baritones, sing at a precise 20 hertz. This whale, this one whale, was a soprano. It was singing at a frequency that no other whale in the world uses. The scientists tracked it. They kept tracking it. They tracked it for years. It was moving. It was healthy. It was singing. And it was alone. It was following the migration patterns of a blue whale, but it was never traveling with them. Its voice was never answered. This is how the loneliest whale in the world was born. The story captured the public imagination in a way that almost no other scientific tidbit ever has. It was a haunting metaphor, a single massive creature, the size of a bus, calling out, and calling out, and calling out into the dark for its entire life, and receiving nothing but silence in return. A creature speaking, a language of one, out of tune, with the entire vast, cold, black world. This, of course, triggered a massive scholarly debate. Who, or what, is it? The theories are heartbreaking. 1. The hybrid theory. This is the most likely scientific answer. 52 hertz is the product of a forbidden love. It's the mule of the ocean, a hybrid child of a blue whale and a fin whale. It's genetically confused, and its voice box, or phonic lips, developed in a way that is in between its two parents, creating a unique soprano voice that neither species recognizes. 2. The deaf theory. This one is just as sad. It is a normal whale, a blue or a fin, but it's deaf. It can't hear its own voice. It thinks it's singing at 20 hertz, but with no feedback, its note is just wrong. It's like a singer trying to hit a note, but wearing noise-cancelling headphones. 3. The last of its kind theory. This is the romantic fringe theory. This is the one that gives you chills. What if it's not a broken hybrid? What if it's perfectly healthy? What if it's singing the correct song for a species of whale that no longer exists? What if it is the last 500-year-old Greenland shark version of a whale, the sole, lonely survivor of an ancient 52 hertz lineage, and it is spending its entire long life calling for a mate that died 300 years ago? There is a small update to this story. In the 2010s, new, more sensitive hydrophones in California did detect other, faint signals at this same frequency. So 52 hertz may not be totally alone. It may just be part of a very small, very rare hybrid family. But for decades, it was the only one. A single, solitary, soprano voice singing its lonely heart out, using the telephone line of the deep, and waiting for a call that never came. That lonely 52 hertz whale is a haunting mystery. It's a ghost in the machine, a signal that almost makes sense, but is just wrong enough to be deeply unsettling. It's a known unknown. But now, we must go deeper. We're going to leave the 1,000-meter-deep SOFAR telephone channel and descend to the most extreme acoustic environment on Earth. We are returning to the Challenger Deep. In 2014, researchers from Oregon State University and NOAA decided to do something that sounds simple, but is technically audacious. They wanted to find out, what does the bottom of the world sound like? Is it a place of perfect, crushing, eternal silence, as we've always imagined? They built a lander, an underwater listening station armed with a titanium-encased hydrophone, or underwater microphone, designed to withstand the 7-mile-down, 16,000 psi pressure. They dropped it overboard, and for 23 days it sat in the pitch-black ooze of the Mariana Trench and just listened. When they retrieved it and unpacked the audio files, they were stunned. The Challenger Deep was not silent. At all. It was noisy. They heard the constant, distant rumble of earthquakes from the grinding tectonic plates. They heard the groan and crack of typhoons raging on the surface 7 miles above. They heard the thrum of container ship propellers passing by on the horizon. And they heard a voice. This was not the lonely song of the 52 Hertz Whale. This was something else. This was not a natural sound. It was a 5-part, highly structured call. The scientists, listening in their lab, described it in detail. It would begin with a low-frequency moan, like a Star Wars Wookiee growl down at 38 hertz. This moan would be followed by a strange, metallic-sounding something, and the entire call would end with a high-frequency, sweeping whistle that shot up to 8,000 hertz. It was, to put it mildly, bizarre. It sounded biomechanical. It sounded alien. It sounded technological. This was the too complex problem. The first, most obvious culprit for any deep-sea noise is geology, an earthquake, or technology, a submarine. But this call defied both. It was too complex, too structured, too repetitive to be a random geological event like a slipping fault line. But it also didn't match the sound signature of any known submarine or any known piece of human deep-sea equipment. The only remaining conclusion was the impossible one. It had to be biological. Something olive was down there, 7 miles deep, singing a science fiction song that sounded like a robot groaning and a kettle whistling. This, of course, triggered a frenzy among biologists. This was a brand new mystery. It was dubbed the Mariana Whistle, or the Western Pacific Biotwang, and the hunt was on to identify the singer. This is where the leading hypothesis comes in, and it's a great one. The singer, scientists now believe, is a minke whale. Now this may sound boring at first. Oh, it's just a whale. But minke whales are the weird cousins of the whale family. They are the prank callers of the deep. They are notorious for making bizarre, non-whale-like sounds that have nothing in common with the majestic songs of the humpback or the deep bass of the blue. Minke whales in the North Pacific, Hertz, for example, are famous for the boing call. It sounds exactly like a cartoon boing jig-gag sound effect. For decades before we identified them, submarine operators were haunted by this boing sound, thinking it was a new, secret Soviet sonar. It wasn't. It was just a lonely minke. So the leading theory is that this Mariana whistle is a new, previously unknown dialect. a regional call of a minke whale population that lives near the trench. But this answer just creates 1,000 new questions. 1. Why? Why this bizarre sound? What part of that Wookiee-to-kettle call is language? Scientists are still in a heated, open debate about what it means. Is it a mating call? Is it a territorial call? A get-out-of-my-trench warning? Is it echolocation, a biological sonar that the minke is using to map the trench walls as it hunts? 2. Why so deep? Minke whales can dive deep, but 7 miles. Is the whale itself down there? Or is it just singing at the surface 10,000 feet up and the perfect sound pipe? Acoustics of the trench are funneling its voice down to the hydrophone, making it sound like it's at the bottom. We don't know. The minke is just the leading hypothesis. The other ideas are still on the table. Is it a new species of whale we have never seen? Is it another lonely hybrid, like 52 Hertz, but broken in a different way, creating a metallic sound instead of a soprano one? The Mariana whistle is a perfect snapshot of modern oceanography. The deep is not silent. It is noisy. It is a cacophony of earthquakes, typhoons, propellers, and voices. And we are down there, listening, but we don't speak the language. The Mariana whistle is a complex anomaly. The 52 Hertz call is a lonely anomaly. But there is one sound, one recording that stands above all others. It is the king of all deep-sea mysteries. It is the ultimate anomaly, the one that broke out of the science world and became a true global Lovecraftian legend. It is simply the Bloop. The year is 1997. We are once again listening in on those declassified Cold War Soyuz hydrophone arrays, which NOAA is now using to monitor the deep ocean. The arrays are in the SOFAR channel, the Deep Sound Superhighway. On May 19th, the hydrophones in the remote southeastern Pacific Ocean, all of them, pick up a sound. And it is not a whistle, it is not a song, it is a bloop. That is literally the technical name the scientists at NOAA gave it, because that's what it sounded like. It was a bloop, bloop, bloop. It was an ultra-low frequency sound, even lower than a blue whale's, and it was incomprehensibly powerful. This is the problem of the bloop. This wasn't a local sound. This bloop was so loud, so high amplitude, that it was picked up simultaneously by hydrophone sensors that were 5,000 kilometers, over 3,000 miles, apart. This is a sound that crossed an ocean. The scientists at NOAA's Pacific Marine Environmental Laboratory were, to put it mildly, stumped. They ran the audiogram. They looked at the sound signature. And this is where the real mystery began. The bloop did not have the fingerprint of an earthquake, a rumble. It did not have the fingerprint of a submarine, a propeller. It did not have the fingerprint of a volcano, a hiss or explosion. The sound signature of the bloop, its frequency sweep, was a rapid broadband sound that looked organic. It had the tapering profile of a biological creature. This is the moment the legend was born, because the scientists, in their official reports, had to do the math. They had to ask the what-if question. If this is an animal, what kind of animal could make a sound that crosses 3,000 miles of ocean? A blue whale, the loudest animal on Earth, can be heard for only about 1,000 miles. This sound was exponentially louder. The calculation was simple. The conclusion was terrifying. The scientists at NOAA, in their official analysis, stated in no uncertain terms that if this was an animal, it would have to be many times larger than the largest blue whale. Let that sink in. A 60-ton blue whale is the size of a 737. This thing was bigger. This was the Bloopzilla calculation. This was Cthulhu. This was the proof that H.P. Lovecraft had been right. The internet exploded. This wasn't a fringe theory from a creepy pasta forum. This was NOAA. This was the government. The Bloop was, for a decade, the single greatest real piece of evidence that a truly gigantic, kaiju-sized monster was at that very moment living in the deep Pacific. And then, in 2012, after 15 years of monster fever, NOAA solved it. The answer is the perfect buzzkill punchline of science. It wasn't Cthulhu. It was an icequake. As climate change has accelerated, the calving of Antarctic icebergs has become more common. When a truly massive, city-sized iceberg breaks off the ice shelf, or when its keel, its bottom, drags and scrapes along the rocky continental shelf, it groans. And that groan, that cracking and fracturing of miles of ice, creates a sound. A low-frequency, high-amplitude bloop. Bloop, bloop. The bloop was not the voice of a monster. It was the death scream of a glacier. The organic sound signature? That was just the physics of ice fracturing, which, it turns out, just happens to look a lot like a vocal fold. The bloop was just an icequake. But the mystery of it, the legend of it, lingers. Why? Why were we all, as a culture, so disappointed when we learned it was just ice? Why did we want it to be a monster? Because, just like those 19th century cartographers, we cannot stand a blank space. We need the abyss to be inhabited. The bloop tapped into that primal thalassophobic fear and hope that something truly gigantic, something godlike, something older than us and bigger than us, still rules the 90% of our planet that we cannot see. The Bloopzilla is dead, but the desire for it is not. We've been haunted by the bloop, a sound that made us want to believe in monsters, only to find it was the cry of a dying glacier. We've heard the Mariana whistle and the 52 Hertz song. Voices from the dark that prove the abyss is not silent, just speaking a language we can't understand. This entire journey, from the Challenger's first muddy dredge, past Beebe's City of Light, down to the Trieste's impossible fish, through the second genesis of the vents, and past the zombie microbes in the crust, it all points to one single, humbling conclusion. When we talk about the final frontier, our heads snap up. We look at the stars. We think of Star Trek, but we've been looking in the wrong direction. The true final frontier, the most alien, most unexplored, and most hostile territory accessible to humanity, is down. You've heard the phrase a million times. It's a quirky tidbit that's almost become a cliché in documentaries. We know more about the surface of Mars than we do about our own deep oceans. It's one of those things that sounds like a poetic exaggeration, a line designed to make you feel small. It's not. It is a literal, statistical fact. Let's look at the scientific evidence. We, humanity, have now mapped 100% of the surface of Mars. We have a complete, high-resolution global map of its mountains, its dust plains, and its valles marineries, a canyon system that dwarfs our own. We have 100% maps of our moon. We've even mapped 100% of the dwarf planet Ceres in the asteroid belt. And our own planet's seafloor? As of right now, 80% of the ocean floor on the planet we live on is a blur. It's a low-resolution guess from satellites that can sense the gravity of a seamount but can't see it. We have better, more detailed maps of a planet 140 million miles away than we do of a place 7 miles beneath our own feet. How is that possible? Why? The answer is simple, and it's the central theme of our entire journey. It is logistically, physically, and financially easier to go to Mars than it is to go to the bottom of the ocean. That sounds insane, but it's true. Space is hard, but it's a predictable kind of hard. Space is a vacuum. You build a can, a rocket, a rover, that holds its pressure in. We've been doing that since the 1650s, when Otto von Guericke, in a famous historical fact of physics, used 2 Magdeburg Hemisphere teams of horses to prove the power of a vacuum. The deep sea is not a vacuum. It is the physical opposite. It is pressure. It is a 16,000 sekki fist that is actively, relentlessly, 24/7 trying to crush your can. You don't just build a strong wall. You have to build a perfect wall. Remember the Trieste on its perfect dive? A non-essential window still cracked under the load. That is the margin for error. In space, if a micrometeorite causes a pinhole leak in your capsule, you have time. You get a hiss. You have a problem to solve. In the Hadal zone, if you have a pinhole leak, you do not have a problem. You have an event. You have an instantaneous, catastrophic implosion. You are, as Beebe put it, pulpy mass, before your own nervous system has time to tell your brain that something is wrong. It's harder to send a signal through water than through a vacuum. It's harder to build the machine. It's harder to power it. And this difficulty is reflected in our checkbooks as a species. We love space. NASA in the United States has an annual budget of over $25 billion. And that's awesome. NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the entire U.S. agency responsible for all of our oceans, all of our weather, all of our climate, has a total budget of about $6 billion. And the ocean exploration part of that, the find the new vents and seamounts part, it's a rounding error. We spend billions looking up and pennies looking down. This has created a huge, open, scholarly debate in the scientific community. Are we ignoring our own planet? Are we wasting resources on dead rocks in space when we have living, undiscovered ecosystems right here? Or is the search for life in space the only thing that matters? We are a terrestrial species, afraid of the deep and inspired by the stars. We are looking for aliens, while we are systematically ignoring the 100,000 seamount worlds, the shadow biosphere worlds, and the gelatinous life forms that are right now alien and unidentified, right here. We are looking for E.T. when the real alien is a vampire squid. We've established that the deep sea is the true final frontier, an 80% unmapped alien world in our own backyard that we've largely ignored in favor of space. We are haunted by the idea of the monsters in it, the bloop, the 100-foot squid, the oil rig serpent. We are, as a species, thrilled by the mystery of the deep. But now, we have to face the reality. The greatest, most profound, and most tragic mystery of the 21st century is this. We are, at this very moment, systematically destroying this unexplored frontier. And we are doing it before we have even seen it. The monster we've been looking for, the real one, isn't down there. It's up here, and it's dragging a net. We are going to talk about deep-sea bottom trawling. If you've ever eaten orange roughy, or deep-sea perch, or Chilean sea bass, which is a fake market name for the Patagonian toothfish, you have participated in this. Bottom trawling is the single most destructive fishing practice ever invented by man. It is the clear cutting of the ocean. The technology is simple, brutal, and effective. A trawler ship, a massive factory vessel, unspools miles of cable. At the end is a colossal net, a trawl that can be as wide as a football field. The mouth of this net is held open by 2 otter boards, massive 10-ton steel doors, and the bottom of the net, the foot line, is armed with giant solid steel rock hopper wheels designed to do exactly what their name implies: hop over and smash through any rocks, coral, or obstacles in their path. This entire plow, this instrument of destruction, is dragged for hours across the seafloor. Now, where are the fish? Remember? The fish aren't evenly spread out in the mud desert of the abyssal plain. They congregate. They swarm in the oases, the cities, the watering holes. They swarm on the seamounts. The exact same seamounts that we just established are the 100,000 undiscovered worlds. The exact same seamounts that are museums of life covered in 4,000-year-old, slow-growing deep-sea coral gardens. The exact same seamounts that are hotspots of speciation, where 30% of the life we find is new to science. This is the battleground. The trawlers know the fish are on the seamounts, so they target them. A single pass of one of these rock hopper troutles one afternoon over one seamount is an extinction-level event. It is not fishing, it is strip mining. The 10-ton steel wheels and foot line obliterate the city. That 4,000-year-old forest of coral, the entire habitat, the nursery for all the fish, the museum that took longer to grow than the history of human civilization, is pulverized. It is smashed into rubble, into mud. It is gone. It is erased. In a single afternoon. And the net, which is non-selective, just scrapes everything up. The one target. Fish, like the orange roughy, and the 90% of bycatch. The 4,000-year-old coral, the 500-year-old Greenland sharks, the giant isopods, the crabs, all of which is dumped overboard, dead. This is the real monster, and the orange roughy is the perfect tragic poster child for this. The reason we have to trawl for them on seamounts is because they live there. They are slow-growth specialists, just like the coral. The orange roughy, the fish you buy in the frozen aisle, does not even reach sexual maturity until it is 30 years old. It can live to be 150. We are fishing for them, at a rate that is faster than they can grow up. We are, in effect, eating a 100-year-old fish, and in the process of catching it, we destroyed the 4,000-year-old home that it needs to be born in. This is the tragedy. It's not a mystery. It's a crime. And it's a crime that happens in the dark. It's out of sight, out of mind. Because it's 2,000 meters down, on a mountain, we didn't even know existed until 50 years ago. No one sees it. There are no protesters, There are no park rangers. There is only the trawl and the rubble it leaves behind. That out-of-sight, out-of-mind tragedy of bottom trawling, that strip mining of the seamounts, is, unfortunately, just the old monster. It's the monster of the 20th century, a brute force plough in the dark. But as we speak, a new monster is waking up. It's smarter, it's more high-tech, and it's infinitely more valuable. This is the second gold rush. This is deep-sea mining. This isn't about food, it's about minerals. And, in a tragic, almost cosmic irony, this new rush to plunder the deep is being fueled by our noble desire to save the surface. Let's go back to the Challenger expedition. In 1873, when they were dragging their dredge across the abyssal plains of the Pacific, they kept pulling up these things. They were lumpy, black, potato-sized rocks. They called them polymetallic nodules. They catalogued them, noted they were rich in manganese, and filed them away as a geological curiosity. A 19th-century quirky tidbit. For 150 years, that curiosity sat in museums. Now it's the new oil. It's the new gold. Why? Because our entire green revolution, our entire tech economy, runs on metal. Your smartphone, your laptop, the wind turbines, and most of all, the high-capacity lithium-ion batteries in every eco-friendly electric car. They all require massive amounts of cobalt, nickel, manganese, and rare earth minerals. And the single richest, most concentrated deposit of all of those metals on planet Earth is not in a mine in China or the Congo. It's lying on the seafloor, in those potato-sized rocks, 3 miles down. The Clarion-Clipperton Zone in the Pacific, an abyssal plain the size of the entire continental United States, is covered in them. Just lying there. Trillions of them. This is the scientific evidence that makes this so tempting. These nodules are a geological marvel. They grow impossibly slowly. A tiny seed, a fossilized shark tooth, a grain of sand, lies on the seafloor, and over millions of years, the metal ions in the seawater, like iron and manganese, slowly precipitate onto it, layer by layer, like a pearl. The growth rate is estimated at 1 centimeter per million years. These are not rocks. They are time capsules. They are batteries that took 10 million years to build. And we are about to harvest them in an afternoon. The harvesting plan is not subtle. The companies that have already bought the exploration licenses from the International Seabed Authority, yes, that's a real thing, are building the machines right now. They are colossal underwater combine harvesters. They are 3-story tall, tractor-like robots that will drive along the abyssal plain, hoovering up the entire top 4 inches of the seafloor. They inhale everything, the mud, the microbes, the shadow biosphere, and the nodules. They filter this slurry inside their own guts, keep the potatoes, and then vent. The waste. A massive, suffocating plume of pulverized mud and grindings that is belched back into the water column, where it will drift for hundreds of miles, choking and burying every living thing that the harvester didn't inhale in the first place. And that's just Phase 1. Phase 2 is the real sci-fi nightmare. The other target, the harvesters, are for the plains. The other robots are for the cities. They are coming for the hydrothermal vents. Remember the black smokers? Those 700-degree chimneys? That smoke is superheated, mineral-rich water. The chimneys themselves are the precipitated result. They are, quite literally, solid, high-grade ore. They are massive sulfide deposits of copper, zinc, silver, and gold. They are dragons' hoards built by geology. The new generation of robots aren't harvesters. They are grinders. They are autonomous rock-chewing machines that will be sent down to grind the vents down to nothing, chew up the cradle of life, and pipe the ore slurry to a factory ship on the surface. This is the extinction debate. And it's not really a debate in the scientific community. It is a primal scream of panic. Scientists are, in a rare unified voice, arguing that this isn't mining. It's an extinction event in the making. The nodule plains. They look like mud, but they aren't. Those potato rocks are the only hard surface in a 1,000-mile mud pit. They are the only thing that the deep-sea corals and glass sponges, the 4,000-year-old ones, can attach to. When you hoover the rocks, you are clear-cutting the trees. You are erasing the entire habitat for a slow-growth life that will never, in human timescales, come back. But the vent grinding, that is the real sacrilege. This is the ultimate tragic irony of our entire journey. We are planning right now to pulverize the exact ecosystem that, in 1977, changed the definition of life. The one place on Earth that proved chemosynthesis was real. The one ecosystem that is our best guess for the origin of life on this planet. We are going to destroy our own Genesis story. And why? To build batteries. We are going to extinguish the cradle of life, the chemical eaters, the second Genesis, in the noble name of saving the surface environment. It is the pinnacle of out of sight, out of mind. We are strip mining a planet we haven't even met, to power a planet we are already destroying. The gold rush for deep-sea minerals is a monster we can see. It's a harvester, a grinder. It's an active, hot destruction driven by economics. But as this gold rush is just beginning, a silent monster, a ghost of our own making, is already here. It has already invaded the deep. It is the other carbon problem. We are all, by now, painfully familiar with carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We know the story. It's the greenhouse gas, the blanket that is warming our surface. But we rarely, if ever, talk about where all that CO2 is going. For the last 150 years, since the Industrial Revolution first began, we have been pumping billions of tons of carbon into the air. But it doesn't all stay up there. The ocean, in its vastness, has been our savior. It has been acting as the planet's great buffer. This is the scientific evidence that is both a blessing and a curse. The ocean has, so far, absorbed between 30% and 40% of all the CO2 we have ever produced. It has literally inhaled it, sucked it out of the atmosphere, and saved us from the runaway greenhouse effect we should be experiencing. It has been our greatest ally. But that carbon doesn't disappear. It doesn't just go away. It changes the ocean. It triggers a simple, brutal, and unavoidable chemical reaction. This is the chemistry. CO2, carbon dioxide, plus H2O, water, equals H2CO3, carbonic acid. That's it. That's the whole story. The more CO2 the ocean inhales from our atmosphere, the more acidic it becomes. It is quite literally acid rain. But in the ocean, this is ocean acidification, and it is the silent killer. This acid is not like the acid in a sci-fi movie, melting a steel-hulled ship. It's a slow killer. It's a subtle killer. It is a thief. And what it steals is calcium carbonate. Calcium carbonate, CaCO3, is the brick of the ocean. It is the building block that millions of species use to build their bodies. It's the LEGO piece of the sea. And carbonic acid loves to steal it. The acid dissolves it, or more accurately, it binds with the carbonate ions, making them unavailable for life to use. And who exactly uses this calcium carbonate? The base of the food web, pteropods, tiny sea butterfly plankton. They are the potato chips of the sea, the primary food source for everything from krill to salmon to whales. Their shells are made of calcium carbonate, and in labs that simulate our future ocean, their shells dissolve. The cities of the sea, coral reefs. The Great Barrier Reef is just a 1,400-mile-long calcium carbonate apartment building. As the water acidifies, the coral can't build fast enough. It bleaches from the warming, and it melts from the acid. The armor of the sea, crabs, lobsters, mussels, oysters, all of them build their armor, their shells, from calcium carbonate. We are, in effect, disarming them. We are melting their armor while they are still in it. Scientists are still in a heated debate about how quickly this acidification front will penetrate the deepest parts of the ocean. For a long time we had a fringe and very hopeful tidbit of a theory, that the deep sea, with its older water and different chemistry, would be buffered from this, that it would be a safe house. We were wrong. The acid is sinking. The anthropogenic carbon, our carbon, has already been detected in the Hadal zone. The invasion is complete. And this brings us back to the Hadal snailfish. Remember the snailfish? Our ultimate survivor? The little pink gelatinous paradox that thrives at 16,000 psi? The creature that isn't a tank of steel, but a masterpiece of chemistry. The fish that survives the pressure by flooding its cells with TMAO to scaffold its proteins? It's the perfect Hadal creature. It belongs to the pressure. It has won the pressure game. But it's still a fish. It still has a skeleton. It still has bones. And in its inner ear, it has otoliths. These are the ear bones. They are tiny, solid, rock-like structures, and they are what all fish use for balance and hearing. And what are otoliths made of? Calcium carbonate. This is the snailfish paradox. This is the ultimate cosmic irony of our entire journey. The one creature on planet Earth that has perfectly evolved over millions of years to defeat the single most violent, crushing physical force on the planet. The one creature that literally belongs to the 16,000 psi hellscape of the Hadal zone, a place we can't even touch, is about to be undone. It is about to be dissolved, melted, and extinguished, not by the pressure it mastered, but by our fumes, by the ghost of our Ford F-150s and coal plants, a silent killer that we sent down. 7 miles. into a world we have never even seen. And so, we're at the end of our journey. We've gone from the sunlit, familiar blue of the photic zone down, down, through the twilight, into the absolute crushing black of the midnight zone. We've stood in the Challenger's wake, we've peered out of BB's tiny quartz window, and we've landed 7 miles down with the Trieste at the bottom of the world. We've sailed from a world of myth, filled with krakens and sea monks, to a world of science, which has, in turn, given us monsters far stranger than we could have ever invented. We've met the 500-year-old Greenland shark, a living time capsule. We've met the vampire squid, an evolutionary ghost hiding in a world with no oxygen. We've seen the second genesis of life, the chemosynthetic cities of the vents, and the zombie microbes that are, by mass, the true life on this planet. We've listened to the lonely song of the 52 Hertz Whale, and we've been humbled by the Bloopzilla that wasn't a monster but just a dying glacier. We thought the deep sea was an alien world, a separate place, a dark, cold, dead void. But we've learned that it is not. It is the engine of our planet. It is the great buffer that controls our climate. It is the cradle that may have birthed life itself. It is the shadow that holds 90% of our biosphere. It is, in every way that matters, the beating heart of the Earth. And that is the final reveal. That is the twist at the end of our long, dark journey. All this time, we thought we were exploring the deep. But we weren't. We were just looking in a mirror. The ocean is the ultimate mirror. It reflects us. It reflects our primal fears, thalassophobia, the bloop. It reflects our infinite curiosity, the Alvin, the Trieste. And now, it reflects our shadow self. It reflects our hubris. We came down here, into the dark, searching for monsters. We wanted to find the 100-foot squid. We wanted to find Cthulhu. We wanted to find a dragon in the abyss, a great sea serpent from the oil rig. We hunted for monsters, and we found them. We found the deep-sea trawl, a monster that clear-cuts 4,000-year-old gardens to catch a 150-year-old fish. We found the deep-sea grinder, a monster that is, at this very moment, preparing to pulverize our own cradle of life, to build batteries. And we found the ghost monster, the silent killer, acidification, a spectre of our own making, a byproduct of our surface lives that is right now melting the unmeltable fish. 7 miles down, we spent our whole journey looking for the unidentified creature. And in the end, we found it. It's us. We are the anomaly. We are the super predator that is not in balance. We are the invasive species of the deep. And so the final question, the only question that matters, is no longer, what is down there? The real question, the one that we are all in this control room to answer, is, what do we do now? And as we ask that question, we begin our long, slow ascent. You can feel the hum of the motors fade, the journey's end approaching. We are rising, leaving that world of pressure and darkness behind. We ascend past the Hadal trenches, past the 4,000-year-old coral gardens of the seamounts, now just a memory in the dark. We rise past the abyssal plain, that vast, muddy, nodule-covered plain, and past the hellish, life-giving spires of the hydrothermal vents, winking out one by one in the distance below. We rise, and we continue to rise, climbing up through the midnight zone, past the realm of the anglerfish and the colossal squid. The cold 4 degrees Celsius water gives way to something a fraction warmer. We are rising through the twilight zone, that world of vertical migration, past the cloak and dagger bioluminescent flashes, past the ghosts of the gelatinous kingdom. And then, after all this time in the black, you see it. A hint. A change in the darkness. It's not light. It's just less dark. It's a faint, deep, ghostly blue. The sunlight of the world above, 600 feet away. You rise toward it. The blue gets brighter, richer. It becomes a ceiling of shimmering royal blue. And then, with a gentle breach, you are through. You are on the surface. The sun is out. The air is warm. You are home. But that other world, that 90% of our planet, is still there. It's just waiting in the dark beneath our feet to see what we do next. But that is a question for tomorrow. Tonight, you are safe. Tonight, you are on dry land. The monsters are far away, and it is time to rest.